to hear Patrick Stewart saying to the room full of huge Star Trek nerds, therapy was the best thing that I did for myself and you should all go. Amen. Like, good job, Patrick Stewart, for saying that.
Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 91, recorded April 2024. This is the Trek Profiles Podcast, where each episode we interview a Star Trek fan and we try to figure out why this show matters to us. I'm John, your intrepid host of this whole enterprise, and I welcome you to this, the Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 91. If you wish to get in touch with us, you can reach us at feedback@trekprofiles.com, that's email, or on Facebook or Twitter or Blue Sky at Trek Profiles. Spoiler warning, on this show, any episode of Star Trek may be discussed at any time. You have been warned, humans. As always, my trusty sidekick and co-host is the occasionally obdurate, objectively obedient, yet oddly obfuscatory M5 Multitronic unit.
M5 activated.
M5, let's do the housekeeping.
Announcements and housekeeping ready.
This podcast is an independent show. If you'd like to support us, the best way to do that is just to follow us wherever you are getting your audio. We're on all the major platforms, and your following us helps other Trek fans find us. This podcast is 100% free, but if you'd like to show some appreciation, please consider a donation to our official charity, and that's the Children's Fund for Glycogen Storage Disease. There's a link at trekprofiles.com/donate, which goes directly to the charity if you'd like to participate. There are some lightly edited outtakes and bonus material at the end of this episode. It'll come after the ending audio cards. Enjoy it, or not, as you choose. At the end of every episode, my guest faces my Kobayashi Maru lightning round. They get 5 terrible multiple-choice Star Trek questions, and they have to give us their answer. And after each episode drops, I tweet those questions out as polls where you can have your say. So let's take a look at the questions from episode 89 with Mike Chen and see how it went. Where are we hanging out on Parnassus Beta, the Mercantile, Grafton's Flower Shop, or the Lapithus Market? My guest said the market, but the audience said nope, the Mercantile was the place to be with a 44.4% vote. The market got 33.3%, and the Flower Shop got 22.3%. Are you the X or are you the Y? My guest Mike said he was the X, but in the Twitter poll, I decided to throw in a third option, which was, I don't understand this question because I guess that maybe some people wouldn't get the reference to the musical episode, and that actually won with 41%. But in the X versus Y situation, X did beat Y 35 to 24%. Regarding Vulcan Tevmel, how do you prefer your twist? 3/4, 1/2, or 1/4? My guest said a 3/4 twist was the way to go, but in the online poll, they said nope, it would be a half twist, which won at 45%. A quarter twist came in second at 28%, and the 3/4 twist was at 27%. Okay, we're buying some paintings at Pelia's store in Vermont. What are we taking home, the Manet or the Vermeer? My guest wanted the Manet, but in the poll, well, people just couldn't decide, and it came out to a 50-50 tie. And finally, which term best describes the crew of the Enterprise? Unbreakable, unshakable, ovational, or sensational? This was a reference to the musical episode for those who didn't get it. Now, my guest said unbreakable, but that was not the choice online. The poll people said sensational by 40%, followed by unshakable at 25%, with unbreakable at 20%, and ovational only getting 15%. Now, if you enjoyed those questions and would like to take a stab at writing your own for possible inclusion in the show, send them to me, feedback@trekprofiles.com, or DM me on Twitter. And in fact, some portions of the Kobayashi Maru lightning round questions in this very episode were written by listener Adam Saunders. I thank Adam for his support and suggestions. That's it for announcements. Let's get to it. M5, start the show.
Commencing interview transmission.
Her favorite character goes only one way, and that's the Janeway. She's fond of the Betazoids and also the Borg Queen. I guess she likes those B characters. She has one favorite ship, but 2 favorite versions, and it's the Enterprise, the F and the D. She's from Connecticut, North America, Earth, and Sector 001. It's Amy Imhoff. Welcome, Amy, and thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you, John. It's great to be here.
Amy, are you a Star Trek fan?
Yes, sir, I am.
And what is your earliest recollection of something called Star Trek?
So when I was 7 years old, I was flipping through the channels, or maybe my dad was, and I happened upon yesterday's Enterprise, Next Generation. I was born in 1983, so that would make it around 1990. So it was either airing on a rerun or it was just I don't think it was airing for the first time. It must have been a rerun because I think it was like during the day. It was like a weekend day. So yep, that was my first experience with Star Trek was yesterday's Enterprise and the very interesting episode with the first known female captain that we saw on screen, and that seemed to be writing on the wall.
Was Star Trek 4 out before that? I guess not, huh?
If it was, I had not seen it. So for me, it was the first. It was definitely like from out of the gate, there was not a tradition of women could not be Star Trek captains.
Oh, right on.
So for me, I saw Rachel Garrett, and what pulled me in was that Whoopi Goldberg was in it. And as a little kid, I had watched her in like Sister Act, and so a lot of these other shows that and my parents thought, well, if Whoopi Goldberg's on it, it must be totally fine. so, and my dad knew Star Trek, so he was like, "You want to watch this?" And I was like, "Yes, I want to watch it. Whoopi Goldberg's on it."
You are not the first person to tell me that enjoying Whoopi Goldberg and Sister Act was an entryway into Star Trek for you. So I think that's just fantastic.
Well, I think I just as a little kid, your brain just goes like, "Oh, I know her, and I love her. So let's watch this other thing she's doing." Because I had seen other movies that she'd done that my parents had showed me. I'm trying to think of one. I remember watching Eddie. She played like a basketball coach when I was little.
Oh wow, I don't think I've seen that one.
That's a great one. You should watch it. It's great. But yes, Whoopi Goldberg and her kind of like ubiquity in that time period, and being as a reputation for. I know she has a comedy career that was definitely more of an adult set, but also for little kids, she was seen as somebody who was like. You liked her and you knew she was going to sing and you knew she was going to be fabulous. So I was like, okay, let's watch Star Trek because Whoopi Goldberg's on it. And then Tasha Yar plays prominently in that episode as well.
Absolutely.
So it's a very female driven episode. So I think that's probably why I hooked into it the way I did and why I decided to keep watching. Because I remember when we were finished, my dad said, "Do you want to watch that again?" And I said, "Yes, I want to watch it again." So I started watching it, and it was weekly occurrence of Star Trek The Next Generation in my house, and I became way bigger of a fan than my parents anticipated.
What have we done, says your parents.
What have we done?
And so did you just continue watching all the Berman era stuff right as it was coming out?
Yes. Yeah. Whatever channel was doing reruns in Pennsylvania at the time, that's where I grew up. I would watch those and tape them. I had a big collection of VHS tapes. Sure. Shout out to my fellow 80s babies. And I also started getting Star Trek books out of the library. I think I horrified Keith DeCandido, and I told him that I used to read some of his books when I was like 12, and he was like, "Oh God, I'm so old." But I'm friends with all those guys now. Through the Shore Leave convention, I met a lot of Star Trek authors like Dayton Ward and Keith and Michael Jan Friedman. And Kevin Dillmore and Dayton Ward. Did I say Dayton already? I love Dayton. Yeah, so they had all been writing Star Trek, and Michael Jan Friedman had written a lot of my favorite books for Next Generation. So that was exciting to meet him, and he's the nicest. Mike is a really sweet guy.
I want to stay in chronological order for a minute. So when you were a kid taking those Star Trek books out, and this is, I guess, would be the pocketbook era.
Yes.
Which were maybe the top couple of books that stick out in your mind from that period of time?
It was Peter David's books, actually. It was Imzadi, because I loved Counselor Troy, as we'll talk about in a little bit. And also the Q books, Q in Law he wrote, which was really hilarious.
Nice.
He's written some really funny ones. And I think having it be like a more fun adventure than you might see on the TV screen, with like a little bit more like funny dialogue and like some of the stuff that they necessarily didn't get away with on TV, they got to do a little bit more of in the books. Those ones stand out. And then I think, because Voyager only started airing a few years after that, I remember reading a lot of like Christy Golden and Kirsten Beyer. And there was one that Christy Golden wrote called The Murdered Son. I loved that book. And I recently followed her, recently in the last few years, on social media. And she's just really funny. I really enjoy following her. And I really just have like a love for that book. I thought it was a great story. There was another one that it's that I'm thinking of like the plot, but I can't remember the title, so maybe it'll come to me later.
All right, that's fine. I always ask because I think some of those pocket books were just so wildly out there. I
love them. But you have to see, I was a tween and like a teenager, so I thought they were fun. There was one called The Death of Princes. I think it was a Next Gen book.
Okay.
All my Star Trek books are downstairs
It's
in
okay.
next to the DVDs, so I can't look at them. I'm in my office, and my office shelves have different books on them. So.
That's fine.
Books everywhere in my house. I have my master's in literature. Books are everywhere.
So one of the stories that I often hear on Trek Profiles is when people go to college, they sort of fall off in their Star Trek viewing if Star Trek was on the air, because college is a little bit of a different experience, especially for those of my listeners who might be outside the U.S. The American college experience, especially if you're going to a residential school, can be sort of an all-encompassing thing. Did you have an experience like that, or were you still pretty consistent?
So the interesting timing was that both Voyager and the X-Files ended the same year. Which was the year I graduated high school. So a lot of things were ending for me and a lot of new things were starting. And I don't like Enterprise. So I have not seen most of Enterprise. I tried starting to watch it. And I'm sure if it had aired while I was in college, I would have caught up with it because I had met a ton of nerd friends that I did not have in high school. So when I was in high school, I watched Star Trek and somewhat X-Files, but mostly Star Trek in a siloed bubble of just me.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really have a ton of people to talk about it with. I went online occasionally to message boards for Star Trek because I was very involved in the X-Files message board experience.
Okay.
But I found that the Star Trek fandom that I found in chat rooms and stuff was maybe a little more adult than a teenager was into or ready for. And I really just wanted to talk about how cool Janeway and B'Elanna and Seven were. So I really watched Star Trek in a silo for a very long time. And then when I went to school, I went to a youth group meeting because youth group was something I did in high school that I enjoyed.
Mm-hmm.
And they had one on campus. And I went there and I met my friend Josh. And he said, and we talk a little bit of, you talk about yourself in youth group when you're new. And, when it's the beginning of the year, you introduce yourself. And I had decided that in college, I was not going to hide my nerd flag the way I mostly did in high school. I mean, people knew I liked X-Files and Star Trek in high school, but I did stuff like I started watching Dawson's Creek so that I would have something to talk about with the girls in my class.
I gotcha.
I went to an all-Catholic girls' high school in Pennsylvania. So it was not cool to be a nerd the way it is today. Like the way we have, Marvel and Star Wars are like the biggest properties on the planet. And the nerd has inherited the earth at this point, I think. But in the late 90s and early aughts in Pennsylvania in an all-girls school, I was not cool. I was watching Star Trek very much by myself. And when I got to college and I went to youth group and I met Josh, he said, "Oh, wait, you're a Trekkie? You have to come back and meet all the guys." So he was a year above me. I was a freshman. He was a sophomore. I came back to Loyola, which is the residence hall that he lived in, and he introduced me to all of the guys, and among which are my husband, who I will have been with for 20 years on Sunday.
Oh, congratulations. Happy anniversary.
Thank you. Yes, that is our dating anniversary, not our wedding anniversary, but I met all of these dudes that were very into nerd stuff. All their rooms were decorated. They had their action figures. They had their Star Trek stuff. They had, all of the Halo, and they did gaming tournaments and all sorts of things. So my watching did not drop off in so much as it was like, we all went to go see Nemesis together my freshman year. Like that was a big deal. That came out my freshman year of college. And we'd have like movie nights and marathons and things like that. So I was still watching Star Trek. I was not really watching Enterprise just because I did not like it. Like I tried it and I did not like it.
That's fair.
So I felt like it was a step backward to go like before Kirk. But I like Discovery very much. So and I love Strange New Worlds. So it's like it's a different era of Trek now that, starting from 2017 onward. But in college, I was like, why do we got to go back to the time before they had all the cool stuff? Like I was not a big fan of Archer. I didn't like how they treated T'Pol and the other ladies. I thought they really objectified them, and it's a whole thing. So yeah, I was watching Star Trek in college, but not the one that was airing.
Right on. So did you go back at any point in this era and get into animated series or original series at all, or did you just leave that for later? I
had already seen a lot of the original series, and we did do some. When in college, we watched some of the episodes, and now I have the full series on the box set with the animated series. And so yes, I can appreciate what it was. It's still not my favorite at all because Next Gen was where I came in and it was much more progressive. Like for example, when I first saw Turnabout Intruder, which was when I was older, and I think probably after I graduated college, I was like horrified. I was like, what? this is what they ended on. I was just like beyond horrified that that was happening. But I had seen, of course, like, City on the Edge of Forever and, all the Spock, anything with Spock. I loved Spock and I loved Uhura. Tribbles, yes to Tribbles. I love the Deep Space Nine episode Trials and Tribulations. That is a comfort watch and an instant classic, in my opinion. When I first saw that through DS9, oh, it was so good.
Oh, it was absolutely classic. It's funny you're talking about how culture has changed. Before the pandemic, my company, which is a very normal sort of corporate America big company, they hosted something called, what did they call it? I can't remember, but it basically was you could take your kid to the office and trick or treat around the office.
Oh yeah, I've seen it.
And they had a name for it. I can't remember what they called it. Now this is obviously before the pandemic, and my kid was at the right age for that, so I actually brought him to the office and we went trick or treating, and he was dressed in a ninja costume, and I'm in a full Deep Space Nine engineering outfit.
Yes.
If anyone would have said to me when I was growing up, like, there will be a time in your life when you will go to your work dressed in a Star Trek uniform, I would have said, you're out of your stinking mind. That will never happen. And yet it has come to pass.
Well, if someone had told me when I was 13 and watching Kate Mulgrew and crying about not having any friends in middle school, and that I would be sitting on stage with her in front of 6,000 nerds at Star Trek Las Vegas interviewing her, I would have also said, you are lying to me.
Yeah, it's a very strange sort of thing. So
it's awesome, though. I'm very proud of both of us.
So all right, well, let's talk about that then. So what was your very first convention, sci-fi or Star Trek?
Sci-fi, probably Chiller Theater in New Jersey. In the aforementioned group of awesome friends from college was my friend Justin, who had kind of been going to some of those already for a while. Justin is a huge film nerd. He very, very, very into film music. He got me into that as well. Big John Williams fan. So you said you've been in the Northeast and went to school up here in New Hampshire. So every summer in Massachusetts at Tanglewood, which is a music venue, an outdoor music venue, Tanglewood hosts Film Night with John Williams. And so for, I would say, almost 12 years, maybe a couple longer than that, every late July, early August, we would all get in our cars and drive up to Tanglewood, which is for me, it's about 2 hours, maybe a little more. And we would sit on the lawn. We would get our lawn seats, which were only $20. I think they've still tried to keep them under $30 a piece, which is nice. Mm-hmm. So we never had tickets inside the shed, but we would sit right behind the shed, which we would sprint. When the gates opened, Justin would sprint to get the seats right behind the shed, and we put down our blankets and we'd bring picnic food, and people really do it up for Tanglewood. They bring fancy picnic stuff with candelabras and
nice.
Actual glasses for wine and all sorts of things. So we had many fun summer evenings at Tanglewood. And then once darkness falls, they start playing, and they always do. They always have really cool guests. We saw James Earl Jones. We saw Frank Langella, Yo-Yo Ma, Steven Spielberg. We've seen some really cool people that had showed up for various anniversaries. If Indiana Jones had an anniversary that year, they'd have Steven Spielberg there. He'd bring Kate Capshaw because they're married. Karen Allen came one year, and they would do these little mini introductions, or they would say some things before the music started playing, or they would narrate some of the musicalness of, John Williams would probably, have his team write something up for them to say, and they would narrate. James Earl Jones narrated a whole Star Wars thing, of course. And we would do that. So that really grew my appreciation for film and TV music. And I started paying a lot more attention to who was writing the music for shows, and Star Trek. I was like, oh, why can't we do Star Trek music? And Jerry Goldsmith, obviously, who's no longer with us. And I was like, oh, I really wish we could do this for Star Trek and have a really cool Star Trek concert. So occasionally, in Vegas, they will bring in the Vegas
Nevada Pops,
or Nevada Pops, yeah, and they'll do that. But my first experience was Chiller Theater in New Jersey with Justin, and that was great because they had really cool celebrities come that were really icons on screen when I was watching these shows when I was super young. So I was a huge Batman fan. So people say who's your Batman? My Batman was Adam West. When I was
Kapow.
5 kapow. When I was 5 or 6, I was really into that Batman show. I loved him. I loved Burt Ward. I had a huge crush on Robin, he was cute. And but that show had like Eartha Kitt and Cesar Romero and Frank,
still the coolest car that I think has ever appeared on TV.
I love the car. And Chiller Theater would have the cars. They would have the cars be parked outside in the parking lot of the hotel that they did, or it was usually Parsippany, New Jersey. So if any of my East Coast friends are listening, Parsippany is where a lot of cons happened, where we met a lot of Star Trek people. And they would have Star Trek people. And one of the first people I actually met at a Chiller Theater from Star Trek was Gates McFadden. And I was so excited to meet Dr. Crusher. I was so thrilled out of my mind. So that was great. So yes, Chiller Theater was my first convention. I did a very small one in the Northeast that is no longer in existence. And then when I finally had, was working and had my own money, the first Star Trek Las Vegas I went to was in 2011. And that was like my first, this is just a Star Trek con. It's not Star Trek with like a whole bunch of other.
Right. It was dedicated.
So dedicated to Star Trek. And
what was your first reaction to that first start to your first Star Trek, Soul Star Trek?
I loved it. I had a great time. Just meeting everybody. And I met, so what got me into doing panels was I went to a panel that they did on Women of Star Trek. Of course, whenever I see a Women of Star Trek panel, I flock towards it immediately. And I met Ashley Eckstein, who's the voice of Ahsoka from the Star Wars animated shows. And she was on a panel, and I had interviewed her because my friends and I, the nerdy dudes from college, we had started a really funny blog about pop culture called Open the Fridge.
Okay. It
was this whole joke about the fridge, what do you do when you want to have a tasty pop culture treat? You open the fridge. And it was just it was just like 5 of us being interviewed, but we got to do some interviews, which was cool. If you apply as press to various conventions and you're and you say things like, "Thank you for supporting independent small blogs," they're like, "Oh, sure, here's a pass." So I got to do some cool stuff with them. And one of them was I did interview Ashley Eckstein about her new clothing line she had coming out called Her Universe, which, as we know now, is massive. She's in Kohl's, she's in Hot Topic now, but back then she was just making maybe 20 pieces, and she had a couple Battlestar. She had a couple Battlestar things. She was wearing a Spock hoodie that she had a mock-up that was one of the first off the production line to kind of show people what it was going to be. It had ears on the hood, little Spock ears on the side of the hood. And I interviewed her, and we talked. And then the next year, she was not able to do that panel. And she said, "Do you want to take my place on the panel?" And I said, "Oh my God, yes, I do." So that's how I got into doing panels, through Ashley Eckstein and Star Trek Las Vegas when she was a guest there. So that was very cool. So that kicked everything off.
So have you been consistently going to STLV ever since?
Yes. This last year was my 10th Vegas. So this will be 11.
Very nice. Very nice.
Yeah. I've only missed a couple. And of course I didn't go in 2021. I know that they had one in 2021 after the pandemic, but at the ripe age of 37, I got mono,
oh, dear.
So I did not go.
Oh dear! And that was the one that was at the Bally's, if I remember right. Or no,
that was the one that was still at the Rio. The one at Bally's was 2022. Yeah, that because Kate was there and I worked with her for that one, and that was actually the second. Was that the first or second Vegas I went to with her? That might have been the second Vegas I went to with her. The pandemic muddled us all up.
Yeah, it screwed everything up. I've lost all sense of time and space, so I don't even know. I don't even know where I am or what's going on anymore. Okay, so let's return to your Star Trek viewing. So we finish out the Berman era. You've seen all of the TOS and all of that, all TNG, Deep Space Nine, I would assume, all the Voyager. Gave a pass on Enterprise. Then we have the fallow period, and then of course the movies come out. So were you there watching the Kelvin films, or what happened with those?
I am not a huge Kelvin fan. I understand that it brought a lot of new people into Star Trek, and I am very happy about that. I did feel that it was Star Trek in name only, and it was a cool sci-fi movie, but it wasn't Star Trek. Does that make sense?
Well, I guess that would depend on what you define as Star Trek.
It felt like they just wanted it to be action-y sci-fi in space without a lot of the thoughtful, cool stuff that makes Star Trek Star Trek. So, and I also find that, Chris Pine, while nice guy, has one facial expression. I'm not a big fan of his acting, and I also thought they really wasted Zoe Saldana. As we all know, she is great. So I feel like they kind of wasted her, and they made her be into Spock, and I was like, why do they always just have to give the lady a love interest? Can't she do something else? And then of course that episode was Alice Eve,
Mhm.
who played Carol
Yep.
Marcus. That was a silly scene where she was just like, I'm in my underwear now, and I was just like,
Why is this happening?
like, this is clear. It's clearly just aimed at the Hollywood,
Yeah.
you know, the demographic that Hollywood covets, which is like the 18 to, what did they say, 18 to 30 or 18 to 25, like male demographic. And I was like, this is not Star Trek that's made for people who grew up with it. This is not a thoughtful Patrick Stewart era. This is not a badass Janeway era. This is like, yes, we're Kirk and Spock and McCoy. And I have to say, I do like Carl Urban as McCoy very much. I thought he very much nailed that. I liked Simon Pegg as Scotty. He also did a great job, but I really did not like most of the other ones. The one that I can tolerate is the one with
Zachary Quinto.
No, he's fine too. But I really prefer Ethan Peck. I think he's a much better Spock. And I told him so, and he was like, "Oh, I'm so embarrassed." And I was like, "Ethan, you're a great Spock, much better." But no, I think it was the most recent movie. Is that the one with
Beyond.
Idris Elba? Yes, Beyond. That was the one that I have. If I have to pick one that I liked, that one I liked. The other ones I thought were like pretty lame, but. I'm not a Kelvin era. And then of course JJ, I mean, I love Lost. Like I've watched a lot of JJ Abrams stuff, and he was clearly just auditioning to do Star Wars. And he said that. He has said that in the public, that I'm not a Star Trek fan. And I was like, you know what? If you're not a Star Trek fan, then don't effing make this. Like I was like, if you're gonna take control of a franchise that is beloved and is 50 plus years old at this point, you know, make Star Trek. Well, don't make Star Wars with Star Trek names.
But Star Trek has a history of doing that. I mean, they did the same thing with Stuart Baird, who I don't think like ever gave a thought to Star Trek before they cast him. He's like, all right, now we're making a movie, Trek Star or something. You know, I mean, literally the guy shows up and had no idea. So, and we ended up with ended up with.
Yes, we did. But I much prefer Disco and Forward.
All right, so
that is the era I prefer.
So let's talk about that because it's not the era. I think these shows are so wildly different. I don't even know if there is an era, right? I mean,
okay.
Let's talk about it.
I am obviously classically entrenched in my Next Gen DS9 Voyager. That's my OG. That's what I will always love the most. But I really appreciate what they did with Disco and how they took it to a new place while still keeping it Star Trek, or keeping it where it was. And I think that I know that they've struggled. I know they've had a lot of behind the scenes back and forth. When I heard Brian Fuller was attached to it, I've been a huge Brian Fuller fan. I'm a huge Ron Moore fan. They started out on, you know, Next Gen and DS9 and had a very prominent role. And it was really funny as I was looking at the episodes that I gave you, most of them are teleplay by Ron Moore. And I think almost all of them are a Ron Moore episode. And Brian Fuller did a couple of the Voyager episodes that we'll talk about. But Brian Fuller being attached to it was a really big win for me. And I was really sad when he stepped away.
Yeah, I think they did everything they could to remove any of his sort of vision or influence on the show. You know, there was a lot of erasure going on there. And that's...
Yes, there was. And I'm not saying I don't like what came next. I do. It's different, I think, than his original vision. But when I saw that he was attached, I felt like Star Trek was in good hands because it had been with someone who was part of the like legacy of the show, but also someone who had great new ideas. I love Hannibal. I love
Hannibal was fantastic. I loved it. I didn't think
amazing.
I was going to like that show, and I really did.
I did not go into that show expecting to have a crush on Mads Mikkelsen afterward, but now I do.
You know what? I coveted his wardrobe throughout the end.
Oh, it was so
like
good.
Every suit. I just wanted to like put my hand on the lapel.
Brian. That is
just like
that is all Brian. He is up on his custom bespoke suit.
I just wanted to touch those suits. They were just so glorious.
I also wanted to touch Hannibal, but probably for different reasons. And then they added Gillian Anderson. You cannot get any. I mean, your audience can't see my collection of Scullys behind me, but big Jillian fan. So that was great.
So that was a 4-quadrant show just for you. it just every for quadrant.
Me. But he was. I mean, but I had also my brother. One of my brother's very favorite TV shows of all time is Pushing Daisies.
Oh, great show!
And I think that show was extremely ahead of its time in terms of having a very the cinematography and like the artistic choices were very specific and very but very ahead of its time. They would do something like that now. I don't think they would. I don't think TV was ready for it back then, and that's why it got canceled.
It's still a show that I think about every once in a while, and I should go back and revisit that one because I did love it.
And I love Lee Pace. Lee Pace is fabulous, and now he's on Foundation, which, you know, Roxanne Dawson from Voyager is directing a lot of that, and you know they have a great team. Bear McCreary does the music. Like they've just assembled, like, it's been great to see some of the people go from some of the Ron Moore and Brian Fuller shows. Like, look at Katie Sackhoff, you know, start being Starbuck, and now she's on The Mandalorian. She's got that sweet Disney Star Wars money. Good for you, Katie. Like, you know, it's when I see the production team behind something, I'm like a production nerd like that. I've loved seeing where the X-Files team has taken themselves. You know, they've gone on to do Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul and Game of Thrones. So I think one of them won an Emmy for directing for Game of Thrones. I think that was John. I forget. I'll look it up. It's for the episode where Cersei has to walk naked through the streets and gets all the fruit thrown at her.
The Walk of Shame.
The Walk of Shame. Yeah. So whoever directed that, he was on the X-Files first, and it was just like, it's been very interesting to see their kind of trajectories. But it's also, if you notice all the names that I mentioned, these are all white men, and seeing the production teams shifting with Discovery and Picard. And, you know, the first episode of Picard was directed by a Black woman. And it was just very interesting to see how when the behind the scenes kind of shifts, you're getting like, you know, 7 of 9 is being put in not a cat suit. You know, she's got her leather jacket and her flat boots, and, you know, she looks like a badass. And I'm like, this is great. I'm like, this is what I am very proud of 7 of 9's trajectory. I think they did a great job with that. I'm proud of Jerry for where she's taken the character. But it's also, it really comes down to who's behind the scenes. And I think that was, you know, for Discovery and Discovery, Picard. I love Strange New Worlds. I loved Lower Decks. And of course I love Prodigy. I feel like I'm one of the few people on the internet who has promoted Prodigy the way that I had because of working for Kate. So I feel a little proprietary love for Prodigy.
So let's return to the chronology. So Disco comes out. You obviously started watching that. Did you keep up with everything in the streaming era as it was coming out?
Oh, yes. I watched every episode as it aired. You know, I've been to a couple of the premieres that have happened in New York and LA. I think it's great. I love all the teams. I love that Anthony Rapp is on Discovery. Like, if anybody here is a Broadway nerd, like, I'm being in New York and going to plays and shows all through college. I saw Anthony Rapp and Adam Pascal when they returned as Mark and Roger for Rent. That was incredible. So I feel like I've been growing up listening to Anthony Rapp sing. Oh, so that's like that was so exciting for me. And they did a musical, little musical interlude that it wasn't on the episode. It was like an additional type of ad that they did where they sing the, you know, Seasons of Love, but it's to a Star Trek lyrics. And Mary Wiseman and Mary Chieffo were both Juilliard graduates. They were in the same class. And I think they've just assembled such a talented cast of people that, you know, I was totally there for them. And I really loved seeing a Black woman in the captain's seat. I loved seeing Michelle Yeoh, obviously, who I've loved for years. So I think they were hitting all of the spots that I like to see hit for you know, Star Trek and diversity and women and all the cool stuff. So yes, I kept up with everything as it aired.
So it sounds like, as we look back on this discussion, the only hole in your viewing is really Enterprise.
Yes.
All right. You ever going to try to go back and get through it, or not feeling it?
I'm not feeling it. I don't think, I don't really, I know being friends with some of the like John Billingsley, who is a fabulous guy. Like, I love John very much. And I've seen, you know, some of his Phlox scenes, like Phlox's greatest hits. You know, you can watch like a YouTube compilation or whatever. Mm-hmm. But it's just not. It's just I don't feel most of the characters don't resonate with me at all. It's very weird for a Star Trek show to not do that, but it doesn't. I don't like any of them. No offense. I'm sure they work very hard and they did a great job. I just don't like the characters. They don't hit for me.
So you made reference earlier to the fact that you have behind you in the video, which my audience cannot see, a bunch of Gillian Anderson's Scullys. So yes. Obviously you are a collector of some type. Do you collect anything Star Trek related?
Oh, yes.
Tell me.
I have my Janeway collection, of course. And now having worked with Kate, people give me stuff, which is great. I was like, yes, I want all of your Janeway stuff. Give it to me.
So when you say Janeway collection, what does that mean? Does that action figures? Is that what is that?
So yes, it's mostly figures. So if you look at any of the collectibles from a non-Next Generation original series here, because when they release when they release merchandise for Star Trek, it's like Kirk, Spock, Data, Picard. That's kind of like the main release. When it comes to releasing items for characters that are not part of those core people, those core four gentlemen, there's very few things. So fans have taken to making a lot of their own things. So you can customize Funko Pops, for example. I have a custom Janeway Funko. I have a custom Kate Funko from the show Mr. Mercedes, where she played a literal axe murderer. Alma, she was so cool. Just not an expected thing. So she's kind of like, she's sexy. She has a younger guy who's like, he's like the murderer, and she's like egging him on to keep murdering. I was like, this is so outside of Kate's normal wheelhouse, that I was really excited that she got to kind of play with that. But whenever they do make something that is a lady from one of the shows, I tend to pick that up, because I have like some Deanna Troy. So, there's a couple of variants, but usually you see her in her, you don't usually see her in a Starfleet uniform. You usually see her in one of the V-neck outfits that she wears. I have a couple Dr. Crushers that they've released. They have like a bobblehead, and, there's a couple variants of the Playmates action figures. So I have most of the Playmates action figures.
You bring up an interesting point. I'm wondering now, is there any Deanna Troy stuff actually in her uniform?
I think there is like two things, because I have a figure where she's wearing, I have two figures that are Playmates that are the two variants on her curvy neck costume. I don't think they made anything with the blue dress.
No, I mean the actual Starfleet uniform.
Yeah, I'm trying to see if there's anything with the uniform. Like I have this one where she's wearing a scant.
Yeah, well that counts.
From like the pilot.
No, that counts.
So yeah, she's got her sexy little dress. So she has a scant and this is her pilot. She really only wore this for like 2 episodes, maybe the pilot and maybe one more. And I don't think she wore the scant after that. They put her in the dress or the.
Since we're talking about it, be sure to send me a photo of that. Just take a snap with it of your phone. I'll put it up.
Sure.
I will put all of that up on the show notes page up at Trek Profiles.
Oh, cool. Yeah, no, I will. And I also collect some of the ships, not a ton of them, because there's so many from Eagle Moss.
Yes.
I have, what's over there? I have a gold. Well, and I have the pins, the Fansets pins, which I really like. And they just did like a Voyager one where it's like a pin, but it's massive, so you can stand it up and it has a magnet. So I have, I tend to get ones that are like my favorites, right? But if I see something cool, I'll usually pick it up, right?
What's your favorite item in your collection right now?
My favorite item.
It can change tomorrow, but right now, today, what's your favorite item?
I would have to say it's the X06 Janeway figure.
Very nice.
Because so few, until X06 started making some of the characters that you don't see very often. Like I know that I saw Todd Stashwick tweet that they made a variant for Captain Shaw, and I think that's great that they're doing the characters that are not just Picard and Data. They're doing all the characters, and they're doing I'm probably going to pick up, when they do Strange New Worlds, I'll probably pick up some of the people from that. I saw some of them. I think they have a B'Elanna coming out. I don't think she's out yet. Maybe she is out. I know they did Bob Picardo, they did a doctor. They're doing the whole cast, which is great. Do the whole cast, because people who are listening who are Dr. Crusher fans would agree with me that they made the entire senior staff plus a generic Borg and a generic Klingon Funko, but there is no Dr. Crusher Funko. There's a Troy, but there's no Crusher. I'm like, that's gotta feel for
well,
Gates.
it would be even worse if they made a Pulaski and not a Crusher. That would be the ultimate.
Don't start. That would be terrible.
All right.
But yeah, so that's my favorite, X06 Janeway.
So you've mentioned several times that you ended up working for Kate. How did that come to pass?
So 2016 was the 50th anniversary of Star Trek, and I did a panel on the main stage at Star Trek Las Vegas. Shout out to John Van Sitters for getting the Women of Trek panel on the main stage. And I decided, well, it's the 50th, we need a captain. So I reached out to Kate's representation. Her book had recently come out also, Born with Teeth, her first book. And I said, we'd really love to have you on stage. We're going to have Joe Trimble is going to join us as well. And we had 4 fabulous ladies that were also part of. One of them was Jara Hodge from Women at Warp. Then Kayla Iacovino, who is a actual volcanologist who studies volcanoes. Then she works for Trek Movie. And Mary Serwinski was part of our panel. She had been doing the Ladies of Trek panel in Vegas for a while. and myself. And we had a great time, and Kate was on stage with us, and we had a lovely discussion in front of the many adoring fans of Kate. I'm sure she helped bring us a lot of butts in seats for that panel that might not have normally been there. And afterward, I mentioned to her that her website was, she had a fan running a website for her, but it wasn't like an official website. It was kind of like an unofficial official, because she would like do a little. She'd sit down with the woman who was running it for a little while, but it wasn't like she had an official presence online. And her publisher had set up some social profiles, but she wasn't posting. And I was like, you kind of have a gap here in the ability to get the information out and interact with the fandom, and, interact with these fabulous people that have, always said to me, like, oh, I'm an astrophysicist because of Captain Janeway. Like, I went into the sciences because I saw a woman on the bridge, like that kind of thing. And her partner Bennett was like, see, he's like, you need to be more out there. And then of course the ladies on Orange is the New Black, which is what she was filming at the time, had also told her, you need to be on social more. Natasha Lyonne has like over 1 million, maybe closer to 2 million followers now. And they were telling her that she had to get on there too. And she was like, all right, I'll think about it. And then of course she had to keep filming, and she was very busy. Kate's always very busy and always working. So I finally connected with her again and said, she said, well, I'm writing a second book, and it's going to come out in 2019. And she said, I think we'd like to bring you on board to do social media, and to kind of just, I said, you can pick my title. She said, well, you can be my media director. And I said, okay. So I became her media director, and I did that for 6 years, and it was amazing. And working with her was great. And I got to meet so many incredible people. Women, it's mostly women that come up to her and say, I work at NASA, and I'm a captain in the Navy, or I do all of these cool things because I saw you on screen. And I felt that was really powerful. And I think that she maybe didn't have quite a depth of knowledge as to how impactful she was. And right before I started working for her, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez made a tweet about Janeway. And someone had been teasing her and saying, oh, this isn't really you. And she goes, oh, it's not really me. I'm really Captain Janeway of the USS Voyager. And I was like, you have to reply. So I like emailed her and Bennett, and I said, oh, you have to reply. This is so important. This is such a cultural moment for young women going into politics and seeing, female leaders. And one of the very first things I did for her was surprise AOC at her last rally in Queens before she got elected. And that was super awesome, was seeing, we kind of hid Kate to the side of the very crowded room, so she didn't see when she walked in to come up to the podium. So she was off to the side, and someone was introducing her to come up to the podium. They said, well, actually, we have someone else who'd like to introduce you. And they, it's on video. You can watch it online. The photo of her and AOC kind of goes around where Kate's holding up the t-shirt, and it's up on my wall in my office. I'm very proud of that. And I think that having her surprise AOC, and her Alexandria's father had passed away, but they watched Voyager together. And he said, he had pointed it at Alexandria and said, you're a leader like Captain Janeway. And I think that was part of like a really formative moment for her, and I think a really formative moment for all of us who grew up watching, because in the 90s the women on TV that were in those kind of roles were kind of few and far between. You had Scully, you had Janeway, and a little bit with Buffy. They always talk about those kind of big three from sci-fi that you really got to see. But a lot of TV that was airing at that time was like sitcoms and Baywatch, and you didn't really have the kind of same touchstones that you have now for all of these amazing women in television that have since come. And I'm very proud of the work that I've done for Kate. I took her following from, it was probably around 30 to 40,000 without having any posting, just because people followed her because she's Captain Janeway. But as of, I guess, the end of last year, we were up to 730,000 people on all platforms. So not quite 1 million, but I'm very proud of what I built for Kate. And I think it allowed her to be part of the conversation. I would bring her in, and I'd send her stuff over, I'd text her stuff or email her stuff and say, look, this is what's happening. What do you want to say about it? And interacting with the franchise, since I knew Janeway was coming back in Prodigy for a long time before anybody knew. And I was like eagerly anticipating the day when I could say something. And I really felt that the pandemic kind of hindered the rollout for Janeway returning in a way that it didn't, because we got to celebrate Picard coming back. We got to celebrate Patrick and celebrate, that whole cast in a way that we didn't really get to celebrate for Janeway returning with Prodigy. And I am disappointed with how Paramount treated Prodigy and canceling it. And I'm glad that Netflix picked it up. Netflix and Kate have had a nice relationship where, she was on Orange is the New Black, which was their first scripted streaming show. So she's kind of part of television history in that way, being part of the first streamer show that was released. So yeah, I is more of a, you are missing this and I can help you. And this is my niche is marketing and writing and digital content and a little bit of event management. I've been doing more event management for aerospace companies in the last couple of years. But yeah, the pandemic definitely, I think, did a little bit of a disservice to the return of Janeway and Prodigy. So I hope Kate feels the love from all the fans because, every time she comes to a convention and I get to see people interacting with her, it's very impressive. And she can be very proud of what she's achieved as Janeway.
Oh, we're big Janeway fans up in here. So the M5 tells me I'm to ask you about what is the connection between Burnham, Worf, and Amy Imhoff. So tell me what's going on here with this. I don't know what this means.
Yes. So I'm adopted. Michael Burnham is adopted. Worf is adopted. And I didn't really realize until later when I was studying Star Trek as a student of, media and a student of like feminist critical theory. The importance of showing different kinds of families and showing an adopted family. And I thought, oh, hey, like me. And seeing Michael on screen, and I know people make fun of it because, they're connecting her to Spock and Spock never mentioned having a sister and all that stuff. And I was like, I don't care. I really enjoy Michael. I think Sonequa is delightful and lovely. And of course, seeing the representation of an adopted person on screen is maybe something I didn't really realize that I needed or wanted to see. Mm-hmm. People see adoption as being very dramatic. It's portrayed in a dramatic fashion when it comes to media and I was never told I was adopted. This is a scandal. This is, all these dramatic things that happen in a narrative. But, I knew I was adopted from a young age. It was not a secret. And then, like so many couples that adopt, my mom did get pregnant. She was told she could not get pregnant. She was told she had endometriosis, which is, we finding that it's more and more common among women. Mm-hmm. And they, she had surgeries and they said, you'll probably never be able to conceive. So I'm adopted. And then 2 years later, she got pregnant with my brother. So my brother is not adopted. And it's very common to have that happen, when you're not thinking about it, when, you stop trying and all the fertility stuff I've heard, from friends. I've had friends from college that they were trying to get pregnant. They couldn't. They adopted. And then as soon as they were matched with someone, they found out she was pregnant. So they have two boys that are very close in age. One is adopted, one isn't. And I just think that's awesome because families come in all different configurations, and seeing that represented through Star Trek and kind of handled in a much better way than I've seen it handled in other media. That was, Worf being adopted. It was not like this big dramatic thing for him. He was like, these are my parents. They're Shenkos. And I guess culturally very different. But I think a lot of kids in the US who are adopted are usually a different race than their parents. Whereas I am not a different race from my parents. So I did not have that component. And I'm, a white girl with Germanic heritage, and so are my parents and that kind of thing. So I don't look very different from my parents. You would not know unless I told you.
Right on.
So yeah, it's like, and Michael obviously is not a Vulcan and is a black woman, and Spock's family being Amanda and all that being a white woman. It's very different. But I liked seeing that evolution of her character and them kind of touching on why this family looks different and why this person was adopted. And yeah, I mentioned it very briefly to Sonequa when I've met her sometimes a little bit backstage and a couple times at her table, and I just said, I really appreciate seeing an adopted person on TV. That's not something I realized that I needed to see, but it it kind of got me a little bit in the feels. I was like, oh, this is great. And it's a lead. She's in the captain's chair. That's great. So that's my connection with the little, I just wanted to mention that because I thought it was maybe something some of your listeners have experienced, or maybe they have adopted kids or adopted relatives. So,
well, Amy, I think it's time to talk about some episodes. Are you game?
I am game. Let's do it.
Let's start with yesterday's Enterprise, which is TNG Season 3, Episode 15. We've already talked about it a little bit in that it was the very first episode that you remembered seeing. Was there anything else you wanted to say about it?
I think just like the fact that I mentioned that is very female driven and bringing how that was a rarity for Next Generation at the time. And especially when you talk about Star Trek in terms of the female characters on Next Generation, they're seen as caregivers primarily to the men on the crew, the ship's counselor and the ship's doctor. But Tasha Yar being fabulous and unfortunately not around for as long as we would have liked to have her.
Right.
And then the actresses have spoken about that. They talked about how they were going to axe one of them at the end of season 1 anyway. And Denise said, well, if you're going to get rid of somebody, don't get rid of Marina, get rid of me. I'd rather move on and do some other stuff. And then, of course, they got to come back and she got to do different storylines and we met her sister and we had to have this kind of different relationship with Tasha Yar as a presence, but not necessarily not necessarily having Denise on the ground doing the Tasha Yar stuff until we met Sela, with the whole Romulan storyline. I think that was an interesting way to bring her back. But just being able to see, I remember asking my dad at the end of that episode, because I was 7. I remember asking my dad and being like, did the blonde lady die? And he was like, I think she's dead. And I was like, oh no. So it was kind of like, here's this great character that you think is awesome. And then, oh no, but she's dead. Just it's like an alternative universe kind of thing. And then Rachel Garrett goes back and then she's dead, right? So it's like, it's an interesting way that they structured it, where it was like, well, and it's been funny for me to come in on that episode as someone who has studied feminist critical theory. I minored in women's studies, which is now gender studies. My master's thesis was on feminist agency and British romantic poetry. So I've written and talked a lot about what feminist agency means. And it's basically the ability of the character to control their storyline, to make decisions themselves, that not have other characters make decisions for them. And it's usually, not having men make the decisions for them, basically. It's like, I feel like it's an extension almost of the Bechdel test, which is, more than one woman with a name who talk to each other about something other than a man. And I mean, if you look at yesterday's Enterprise, that fulfills it. That fulfills the Bechdel requirement. So I'm not surprised that that's kind of what drew me into Star Trek, even though, not every episode is obviously that feminist. And my friend,
I was going to say, the one thing I'll say about the Bechdel test is that it's more of a floor than a ceiling. It's not really something to aspire to. It's more of like, well, let's just give it this quick litmus test, and go from there.
Yeah. And my friend Jara Hodge from Women at Warp, before she was on Women at Warp, she did a blog called Trekkie Feminists, where she watched every single episode of Star Trek and applied the Bechdel test. And you will not be shocked to know that Voyager passed most often, being that its female characters are the captain, the chief engineer, and, 7 of 9's role, which was a bit, she got to do a little bit of everything with astrometrics and alien languages. But the original series and Enterprise both fail miserably.
So let me just say a couple things about yesterday's Enterprise, which is, I actually tweeted about this, and I don't talk about what episodes I'm watching as prep for the show, because I never release anything about my episodes before I actually put them out. But I was watching all the episodes, as I normally do in preparation for this. And as I was watching yesterday's Enterprise, I remember tweeting, there are episodes I've seen more than 10 times. And I watch them in preparation for the podcast, and I fall in love with them all over again. And this was a case here where I had sort of forgotten how good the episode was as I was rewatching it. And just a couple things I just want to highlight. And you can react to any of this or all of this or whatever you like. But
sure.
Worf talking about the prune juice is a reference to the book, The Final Reflection, which is one of my all-time favorite Star Trek novels. And that book is where it says Klingons love fruit juices. And that's where that came from. So if anyone has ever read The Final Reflection, it showed up in the show at that point, because the guy who wrote that line, I think it was Ron Moore, and I think he actually wrote that line, and that's exactly where that came from. So, which I love. I want to try a TKL. I want to know how they are. I've eaten my share of MREs, and I would love to try a TKL.
Oh God, ew.
And those monster maroons without the belts or collars are an obscenity and should be obliterated. Absolutely obliterated. I realize the production reasons for that, but God, I hate them. Yeah. I hate everything about them.
the I don't mind the lack of collar. I do think it needed the
Oh
belt.
God. And it has the belt loop in the back. You can see the belt loop.
Well, the collars always look so warm and stuffy to me. Like they look too warm. That's the only reason why I could live without the collar.
Yeah, we don't know how cool
and
it
also
is,
because I have friends who have made the Monster Maroons, and they say it's like one of the most daunting sewing challenges that they've ever faced. So, and then when they put them on, they're this heavy wool, and then if you're in Las Vegas and you do a photo shoot outside, everybody just goes outside and melts.
Oh yeah, forget it.
So.
Yeah, those are not made for warm weather for sure.
No, they're made for air conditioned sound stages.
One of my favorite acting moments in this episode was when Tasha asked to be reassigned, and Patrick Stewart, the way he plays it, the line is Lieutenant, permission granted. And you can see the way he says Lieutenant, he's going to say Lieutenant, permission denied. And he just changes his tone right there in the middle of the line. And it's like, Lieutenant, permission granted. And you can see when he changes his mind, like after the first word comes out of his mouth, which is a really nice acting moment that I just really enjoyed in the episode. It was really good Patrick Stewart choice. If you want to say anything about any of that, feel free.
We don't have to go on at length about what a great actor Patrick Stewart is. We all know. But yeah, I think that is a nice moment because you don't really get to see her interacting too much with Picard in the episodes where she is alive and, you know, part of the cast. So I think that they allowed a nice moment of kind of send off for her, which was, and you know, then of course she has the moment when Whoopi Goldberg's like looking out the window at the end. Like that's like, I also think it's interesting how they've set up Guinan as a very different kind of a species that we were not used to, like the El-Orion species. And we get into that in Generations, and we get into that in, you know, in a little bit throughout the series. And then again in Star Trek Picard, when we get to see, you know, Guinan as a young woman, which I loved. Seeing Guinan as a young woman and that actress, she did a fabulous job. And I thought, you know, getting Whoopi to come back and be part of that again and be part of the cast in a way that, you know, now they're all at this different kind of celebratory point in their career. That was lovely. So it's just such a nice through line for me just to see that evolution.
Deep Space Nine, The Darkness and the Light, Season 5, Episode 11. This, of course, is the one where a hidden enemy is hunting down members of the Shakar resistance cell. This episode certainly had a lot of it rubs the lotion on its skin kind of vibes as you're watching it.
It did.
You know, we begin with the Vedics, and we begin with sort of the Shakar resistance cell and going into all of the crimes that are happening. And, of course, Major Kira has to sort all this out. So tell me, what about this particular episode is special to you, Amy?
So I wanted to pick an episode that was meaningful where Major Kira had a significant part, because watching Deep Space Nine and the touch points for me being Jadzia and Kira, they're both great characters. The actresses are both lovely, fabulous people. I've been able to professionally work with them. And, you know, Nana is writing A Woman's Trek book, which I was able to do a little interview for. And, you know, really getting to see how she has just completely dove into the entire mythos and long legacy of female characters on Star Trek, and from the original series all the way through until recent. I think she really took on that project with great gusto and a great attitude, and she tells, you know, she says how much she learned about, you know, the women on Trek. And I think that I learned so much from watching her as Kira, and also watching her now on social media where she does her videos, or Mama Nana videos. And she talks a lot about mental health, and, you know, some of the tools that she has had to employ in her life. And I think it's great to see, you know, talking about Kira as a war survivor, you know, the PTSD around that. You know, her, Nana's son did a tour in Iraq, you know, himself has had PTSD, and thinking about the way soldiers, and especially soldiers in the Dominion War, would come out of that. You know, it's kind of like the episode of Strange New Worlds where the butcher of Jagal, where you see the kind of PTSD that they have, like Nurse Chapel has, and Dr. Mbenga has, and obviously we haven't gotten into Ortegas's yet, but we see, like, you know, the people that survived the Klingon War kind of have this PTSD, but Kira really touched on it first. with what she went through and how she grew up. And in the darkness and the light, she's seeing her old friends. At one point, two of them come to the O'Brien's quarters and scare the hell out of her. And she's like creeping around in the night with her phaser, and they're like, you know, we heard what was happening and we're here and we want to help protect you and we want to, you know, figure out what's going on. And it was just kind of a glimpse into Kira's, like the true seriousness of Kira's life before she became a major in the militia, before she worked with Starfleet, and you know, Starfleet being very, very different than the environment that she grew up with. You know, this is she is now she says to them, she says, the times are changing, we need to change too. And I'm like, that's not something that a character with PTSD might normally say, right? I think that's a very progressive thing for her to say. And just there's the scene between her and Odo after she's kind of lying on her side in the sick bay area, I think, and he's telling her that her friends, that couple that they died, and she's holding her earring, and she says, you know, they made me this earring out of the scraps of the ship from like the first time that she had taken part in an attack. You know, just a very moving character moment for Kira, and really just seeing her strength and seeing the depth of her emotion and the depth of this experience has had on her was very powerful for me. And just, you know, anything that showcases Nana's fabulous acting ability is something that I of course would love to talk about and champion. And I think that, you know, for people in the military, I am not a military veteran. I know you are. Just, you know, seeing people talk about,
I kept the haircut.
This and this. And the story is by Ron Moore and the teleplay is by Brian Fuller. Like, it's very, very much interesting to me that I keep hitting upon Ron Moore, especially in Star Trek. But yes, Brian, obviously, whose work I extolled earlier. But Ron Moore, you know, going from Deep Space Nine to Voyager and then departing Voyager after, you know, differences with Brown and Briga and starting Battlestar Galactica, like, I love Ron Moore. Like, I've interviewed him. I've told him that I like Outlander very much. But I love, and I'm going to preach the gospel here, I love For All Mankind. That is a show that every single one of your listeners need to be watching. Nana also loves For All Mankind. I told her to watch, and she was like, I'm obsessed. So it's such a good show, and the women on it are top tier. You can always tell that the ladies are going to be rocking out when Ron Moore's name is on something. And this episode of Deep Space Nine is a great example of that, because he really lets Nana shine. He really makes her the centerpiece of this episode. You know, everybody's kind of on her side. They're helping her. They trust her. You know, Odo is there and he's like, we're going to find who's doing this. And then when she gets captured, she goes looking for this person, right? She's like, I'm going to take matters into my own hands, because that's Kira, right? She's
while carrying
up for action.
O'Brien's baby, I might add.
While 9 months pregnant.
with not her baby, which is like wild to think about in the show.
Yeah. She says at the beginning, when she's like really upset about her first friend who's passed away, she says, I'm a major in the Bajoran militia. I should protect them. And O'Brien says, well, you're protecting someone else right now, meaning the baby, right? And I think that was also like interesting, because you see very few women in Trek being moms. Mm-hmm. You know, Dr. Crusher is really the only character that had and raised a child during the show that we saw. Mm-hmm. You know, you see B'Elanna give birth right when Voyager gets home. You know, you see that, you know, Troy and Riker have two kids. You don't really they don't talk about that until Picard.
Yeah.
You know, you don't really get much of Troy's journey as a mom. Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, so many women who are watching the show, and, you know, so many young men who are raised by single mothers can really focus in on a touch point in Dr. Crusher because of that. But seeing Kira, because they worked in Nana's real life pregnancy,
right?
Of course. That is her and Sid's kid. Like, it's so funny. There's that one, I forget the one episode where I think she's already pregnant because he'd already transferred the O'Brien's baby to her. And they're yelling at each other, and she's like, this is all your fault, because it really is all his fault.
Yeah, it's a little meta joke right there, you know.
It's very meta and funny, and I love that the writers are funny like that, and they work that kind of stuff in.
I realize this is a Na episode, but I just want to say that whole little sequence with Nog and Jadzia working together, like, that is the buddy comedy I want.
They were great.
They were so
I mean, you know,
fantastic.
and it's funny because you also see Worf and Jadzia coming back from wherever they're going. She says, we're going to send you to get picked up. And then they beam up her friend that had called her, and she disintegrates on the transporter pad in front of them. I was like, this is really crazy. like that doesn't normally happen on Star Trek. But it's funny because Jadzia and Worf, of course, I love them as a couple. I think that they're great bantering together. And You Were Cordially Invited almost made this list. It's one of my favorites also. But I wanted to really focus on the awesomeness of Kira and, you know, just her entire journey with the Cardassians and Gul Dukat. And like, you know, you can't pick every episode when you're doing a podcast like this. So, but that one I think embodied kind of a little bit of everything.
TNG, Thine Own Self, Season 7, Episode 16. This, of course, is the one where Data ends up on the planet with some amnesia, and Troy decides that she's going to go for the commander's test. Certainly a very pivotal episode for Troy, and strangely enough, a Season 7 episode that does not involve lost family members, which every other Season 7 episode of TNG seems to have, which is a very weird thing I noticed one time. So anyway, what about this episode is special to you, Amy?
So seeing Troy take her officer's test and take that extra step in her career and have that conversation with Dr. Crusher at the beginning of the episode, because she says I just rewatched it in preparation for this podcast, and I actually had forgotten about this scene where she's, you know, sitting down with Beverly and they're having a chat.
And Crusher's in the chair. She's got the con.
Yes, she's got the con, and she says, "Oh, you know, you didn't have to take your officer's test. You're already the medical officer on the Federation flagship. You know, you clearly occupy a rank of importance in Starfleet and on the ship." And Dr. Crusher says, "You know, I really just felt like I wanted to push myself and really take that next step in my career." And it's great to see them talking about their careers as officers. And then, of course, she decides that she wants to take the test, and Riker is kind of like he's the one who administers the test to her, and they have that relationship, you know, so she has a background with him. And then, of course, we all know that they eventually do finally get married. They should have let them get married during the course of the show. But anyway, we got there eventually. But I think it's good because they don't really, that dynamic of their relationship does not really play into any of the interactions that they have about the officer's test. Like, she does get frustrated with him, and she does say, like, why do you keep failing me? And it's only when she's able to realize that she has to be willing to send an officer to their death to save the crew and to save the ship, that she really realizes, you know, this is the kind of hard decision that you make when you sit in the chair. And I think as a kid, that was very like almost shocking to me, that like, oh, you like, this is what the stakes are, you know, this is what the stakes are in space. This is like, you know, space is difficult. And, you know, my career has taken me to the aerospace industry. You know, after working with Kate and having a lot of different clients, I became acquainted with Inara Tabir, who is a fabulous woman in space. And Inara is trans. She wants to be the first trans person in space. And she introduced me to an incredible group of people through the Overview Effect Roundtable, which is run by Frank White, who's a space philosopher. And I've just met so many interesting folks, people who've gone up with Virgin Galactic, and Dr. Cyan Proctor, who went up with Inspiration 4, which was a SpaceX mission. And just seeing how, I mean, I've always been a huge fan of the space program. I've always been into NASA, when I was at my first job that we all know when we get out of school, I took this job just so that I would have a good paycheck so I could pay my student loans. I was editing financial jargon as, you know, someone with my English degree. And I would sit in my cubicle in my beige office with its beige walls and the beige ceiling and no window, because I was in like a corridor that had no window. I would watch the NASA missions on my computer. I would watch them do a spacewalk. I would watch a launch. I would do all that kind of thing. And my cubicle mate, the one over from me, thank God we got along great. But she was always like, "What you watching? You watching space TV?" I'd be like, "Yep, watching NASA again." And just seeing the kind of difficult choices that, you know, the people who get into rockets and strap themselves to thousands of gallons of rocket fuel, they are crazy in the best way, because they're doing it to further science. They're doing it to further our understanding of the universe. The experiments that they're doing in orbit are incredible. I mean, people are growing heart and muscle tissue on the ISS, like the National Lab. All of the things that people are doing in space, as Dr. Cyan Proctor says, when you solve for space, you solve for Earth. And people get very on their high horse about, we have so many problems down here. Why are we spending money on all these rockets and on, SpaceX spending on Starship? And, the people who are space is huge right now. It's growing so much. And I don't think people realize just how we kind of abandoned a lot of that when it came to, we haven't been back to the moon in 50 years. We've never had anybody but a white man walk on the moon. And now we're going to put a woman on the moon. We're going to put people of color on the moon. We're going to hopefully build on the moon so that we can launch to Mars and go beyond. So I started working with an organization called Explore Mars in 2022. And they, one of their big goals was to have NASA establish a Moon to Mars office. And they did that last year. And I just think that seeing women in the command structure, seeing someone like Counselor Troy, who is obviously, all about emotional intelligence, she's not they wouldn't consider that the hard sciences, right? She's not an engineer. She's not a tactician, but seeing her say, this is important for me to be able to make these decisions and to be able to have that kind of authority. That was so important to me. And another reason, that I wanted to talk about Counselor Troy is displaying the most emotional intelligence and having her be sitting right next to the captain and kind of championing mental health. I had mentioned a little bit that I'm adopted. Whenever I say my parents, I mean my parents. I don't mean my biological parents, right? Because I did not have a relationship with them. My biological father passed away well before I started looking. And my biological mother is much older and, she has some challenges of her own. So I don't really talk to her that often.
Okay.
And my mom is a very difficult person. And I haven't spoken to my parents in 18 months. I made that decision, to kind of step away from that toxic pattern of like generational trauma. And, I do think that there are some personality disorders going on, especially with my mom. I had started seeing my current therapist about, it's 2024, about 11 years ago. And one of the reasons I chose her from her profile on Psychology Today was because she is familiar with dealing with borderline personality disorder. And I am definitely convinced that my grandmother, my mom's mom, had that because she was just next level kind of nuts. And then seeing the ways in which my mother was raised and the trauma that she has from her upbringing and from seeing mental illness in her family, did not give her any of the tools that she needed to really be emotionally present for her children. And now that has manifested in, I'm following a lot of cool people on social media, like the holistic psychologist and a number of other psychologists who talk about borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. And I don't think I realized that seeing Counselor Troy and having her be part of my life from the time when I was a young child onward is I was seeing someone modeling emotional health for the first time. Because my mom is very reactive. There's a lot of emotional dysregulation in the way she responds to things. I have all of these words now. I have all of these studying now that I did not have until maybe the last 5 years or so, because I've done a lot of reading on it. No one wants to have a negative relationship with their parents.
Of course. And
you had someone on your show who talked about growing up in she's a nurse. What was her name again?
Oh, Stephanie Girk.
Stephanie Girk. Yeah, I listened to that episode and I thought she was incredible. She said she had grown up in a family where becoming a nurse was the most horrible thing she could become because her family was against modern medicine.
Yeah.
And it sounded like she kind of grew up in a little bit of a religious cult kind of a situation.
Well, it was a little weird. They were more like natural medicine. Like it wasn't like what you think. It was a little bit more like homeopathy type stuff. And
gotcha.
It was more of that. It didn't seem to have the religious angle, but I'm not sure how much of that made it into the show, but we did talk a little bit about that for sure.
Yeah, no, I found her very interesting and a great guest.
Yeah, she was fascinating.
She really spoke very, she spoke like very eloquently on that relationship. And as someone who is also not, not speaking to my parents, I identified with that journey. And I thought, so Psychology Today actually did an article where they did a poll as to which Star Trek captain do you want to serve under? Not who's your favorite, who would you most want to serve under? And the answer that won by a landslide was Janeway, because she had the highest emotional IQ. And like, so EQ, is that they refer to it. And I think, totally for me, I'd want to serve under Janeway because she's compassionate. And because she, she's not just a scientist, her leadership skills are excellent. And I think that, if they had allowed us to see Troy and Crusher, like when in the finale of TNG, you see Dr. Crusher as a captain of the Pasteur. And, you see in Picard, you see Gates really taking control and being a total badass and being a real leader. I'm very, very happy for her that she got to finally do that and got to take Dr. Crusher to the next level where she always should have been, right? Mm-hmm. And seeing the episode and seeing thine own self, and also, not just starting out with that conversation that Troy has with Crusher, but also going through it and kind of you can see the wheels turning as she's like contemplating, like, why am I keep failing this test? Reset test, reset program. Like, I have to figure it out. She has this like very tenacious, you can see that throughout Troy's storylines. She's not she's a tenacious decision maker, which I think people don't necessarily ascribe to her unless they've really like looked at it, right? They see Riker like that. They see Picard like that. They don't necessarily see Troy like that. And, Deanna also had a very difficult mother. And, you'd ask me like, who's your favorite guest star character? And it took me a long time to kind of decide between the characters, because Lwaxana Troy is also a great guest star character. Mm-hmm. And Majel Barrett, of course, being like the first lady of Star Trek, and, getting to come in and kind of play the character of Lwaxana and being, an ambassador and a dignitary, but mostly she's just a thorn in her side of her daughter. It's really like, she has that professional aspect. So, growing up, my mom did not work outside of the home. Sure, her primary job was mom and wife. Mm-hmm. And she really kind of pushed that mindset on me as a kid, one of the things that I really remember her asking me when I was young and I loved Star Trek, and I told her, Mom, I'm going to go to space someday. I want to be an astronaut. Her response was not, you can do anything you want. Her response was not, oh, this is what you need to study in order to be an astronaut. It was, what if your husband doesn't want you to go to space? And I remember where I was when she said that to me. I remember where I was sitting in our old house. It's just such an interesting formative moment that you like think of, right? And I said to her, if he doesn't want me to go to space, then I'm getting a divorce and I'm going to space. So I clearly knew my mind at a young age, right? Like I knew that kind of catering to men, which is kind of definitely how I view my mom, as someone who caters to like a patriarchal, view of things. She's always on me, because every time I have a career win, mm-hmm. She'll say to me, you don't have kids yet. When are you going to get on that? And that's not great to hear as, someone who's proud of herself for, I've done over 100 panels. My parents haven't attended a single one of them. Like, I don't really have that support that I think a lot of, like, I always look at like Taylor Swift. Her parents are so goddamn supportive of her. Look at where she's gotten to because she's had supportive parents. I look at Bear McCreary, who's like this incredible composer, raised by a single mom. I've read a couple of her books. His mom is an author, Laura Kalpakian. That's her name. He talks, he said, everything I am because of my mother, because she supported me. And first of all, to hear a man in Hollywood say that, A+, good job, Bear. but also like, I always think to myself, like, yes, my parents encouraged academic achievement. They sent me to good schools, but after I graduated college, it was like the support just went like, what are you doing for me? Like what, like, your job is to be a caretaker of your parents. Your job is to be a good daughter. Your job is to have children, all of these things. And, maybe eventually I would like to have a kid. I would like to be a mom. But it's going to be on my timetable. It's not going to be on her timetable. And like modern psychology has kind of taught us that like toxic relationships like condition us from an early age to like tolerate chaos and tolerate inconsistency and tolerate not getting all of our emotional needs met. And, you know, I've looked for that from teachers. I've looked for that from other, you know, older coworkers in my life, older, you know, cool Star Trek fans that I've met, ladies who are, you know, in their 60s. Obviously, Kate, you know, is somebody who I very much look up to and admire. And she's given me career advice, and I very much value that. You know, it's, you know, like I come from somebody who yelled a lot. There was a lot of yelling, and when she would get worked up, she would throw things, and like, you know, living in a constant state of kind of like fight or flight almost, that is not healthy. It's not a healthy environment for kids. And it's funny because you see a lot of articles now about millennials rejecting that behavior from boomers. Mm-hmm. And you see them like being like, you know, these are my boundaries. You need to respect my boundaries. And parents just like trampling over that. It's like, we're not saying to you that you didn't do the basics, right? You get put a roof over our head. You made sure we had an education and, you know, the things we needed. But emotionally, boomers just don't have those tools. I think they were not given those tools. And to see a show where all the actors are now that generation, you know, they're all boomers, most of them. Mm-hmm. And to see that they were modeling that based on like the Roddenberry philosophy, based on like what they thought Starfleet would model for people, and then applying it to the space program. Like, one of the things that is the biggest concern for deep space is how are the astronauts going to interact with each other? How are they going to psychologically handle being trapped in a tin can for days and days and days as they go to Mars?
So, right? As someone who was on a submarine, let me tell you, that is not an easy problem to solve.
It's not. And the fact that Star Trek has been modeling that since the 80s, if not sooner, is kind of a big deal, because they were showing that you need to have mental health and emotional health as a key component of your overall physical health for a long time. And as I've gotten older and the more I've done in therapy and the more I've seen people in my life go through therapy, the more I realize that it is so necessary. Like when we saw Patrick Stewart in New York last year when he released his book, I got to see him on stage with Whoopi Goldberg, and that was incredible. And he said to the audience, and I tweeted about it later and I got all this haterade, but he said a long time, like he talked about, you know, his first marriage. He talked about his children. He said, you know, he talked about growing up with a father who was an alcoholic, who he saw hit his mother, you know, and I did not have that aspect of it. But he said that someone in his life told him, probably either during Next Generation or shortly after it wrapped, to go to therapy. He said, and I went to therapy for 25 years and it was the best thing that I did for myself. And I'm like, well, I'm really glad that Patrick Stewart, you know, bastion of, you know, white male, you know, Shakespearean, all like Professor X, like, you know, all of the things that he's done in his career and all the things that he has represented to men. And I have several male friends who have said that they have difficult fathers, and to see Patrick Stewart as Picard interacting with the crew members with compassion, without yelling at them, without aggression, you know, the way he's a diplomat has been so important to them because they didn't get it growing up. To hear Patrick Stewart saying to the room full of huge Star Trek nerds, therapy was the best thing that I did for myself and you should all go. Amen. Like, good job, Patrick Stewart, for saying that. And, you know, he, I think, you know, as he's getting older and he looks back on his life, you know, he's probably thinking to himself, yeah, there was some that I could have done better. And I could have been better to the women I married, or I could have been better to, you know, he seems to have a much different relationship now with his wife that he's talked a little bit about. You know, this is all speculation. I don't know him or anything. But just seeing the way he speaks about it and reading his book was very interesting, because he talks about, you know, what he saw growing up, and it talks about the importance of books, and talks about the importance of education, and the importance of, you know, how his mother did nothing wrong, did nothing to provoke his father's anger. His father clearly had PTSD from the war, and they didn't give Patrick's generation those tools either. They did not give the boomer generation those tools to in their emotional toolbox, as I like to say. And to the most important thing that I think someone ever told me was a family friend told me this right after my brother came out. My brother's gay.
Mm-hmm.
And when he came out, he went through a very difficult time with my parents, especially my mother. And someone close to us who I knew growing up said, Amy, you are not responsible for your mother's happiness. And I was like, that's very important to hear, because up until then, she told me I was responsible for her happiness. Like when you're getting these messages as like, someone in your teens and 20s, and you haven't really had that life experience yet, or that ability to say, no, this is a boundary. This is, something you need to work on. You need to go to therapy. Like you need to treat therapy as something to help you, not to complain about other people. That was like very important in breaking the cycle for like, the internalized patriarchy, all of the things that I can kind of see at play now that I'm 40 and now that I'm, that I want to become a mom, and all of the things that I would like to make sure that my kids have in their emotional toolbox. And, it's kind of, it all works in tandem, right? If you're looking at Counselor Troy and Nana Visitor doing her Mama and Nana videos, and, the example that Janeway sets. And it's very interesting, like that you see the patterns in the path that you've been on and what you're seeking out. And I very much was seeking out someone with like a stable emotional intelligence. And that's replicated across these episodes that I picked. It was very interesting when I looked at them as a group. So that's really, why I thought it was so important that Troy be present on the bridge, that she have that extra authority to her, was because she's already modeling these things, and it just gives her greater authority.
One of the things that jumped out at me on my rewatch for this is I was realizing with a little bit more intentionality of watching it that this was a season 7 episode. So of course it comes after the season 6 episodes, Chain of Command 1 and 2, where we have Jellicoe, whatever you think of him. He asks Troy to put on a uniform, and she does. And then at some point she stops wearing it again, and she's not wearing it at the beginning of this episode. But when she goes to see Riker to ask to take the command test, she's wearing the uniform, which I thought was a really smart move and a really good thing to do at that moment.
I agree. Yeah, the costuming choices are important. And I know the costumers are, they've had a lot of different philosophies and costuming departments over the years in Star Trek. And I think is it Gersha Phillips, who's the costumer for Discovery, and kind of the choices she made that went into like, here are the mirror uniform episodes, here's what, the Discovery has changed uniforms quite a few times for their, and like they're just doing it to make the cosplayers crazy at this point. but I kind of love seeing the evolution of the costuming on Star Trek, and especially how it relates to the women, because like I said, with 7 of 9, she went from this catsuit, she was the sex appeal. Jerry couldn't go to the bathroom by herself. She had to like get in and out of her costume. I'm sure it was really, really annoying. To being able to wear, a sweater, a leather jacket, and some, comfy leggings and boots. Like really just good for you, Star Trek costuming department. And it's funny that women have to ask for that kind of equal treatment. And I think Nana even mentioned that Kira's hair in the beginning, and of course there's a whole hair discussion about Janeway that we won't get into, but Kira's hair at first was kind of like a bob. It was like maybe chin length. And then she was like, this woman does not have time for hair. Cut it all off. So I think that it's great that she like went with that super short, no nonsense haircut, because when we did Yuri's Night, which is a celebration of the first human being in space, Yuri Gagarin, it was an event started by Loretta Whiteside and her husband, George. Loretta is a founder astronaut with Virgin Galactic, and George was the NASA chief of staff under Obama. He is now running for office. So if you live in California, vote for George, y'all. And they started Yuri's Night as a celebration where they wanted everybody around the world to celebrate Yuri Gagarin, on his anniversary of his flight to space. And at Yuri's Night, I introduced Gates and Tawny Newsome and a couple other fabulous Trek ladies to Dr. Proctor and Dr. Jessica Watkins, who might be one of the first women to walk on the moon. She's a NASA astronaut. And they all made a joke about how the actresses were the ones who had the gorgeous long hair, and then all of the astronaut ladies have very short hair. Because in space, you don't have time to have long hair and style it and wash it and all that stuff. So most of the ladies, when they go up to the ISS, they cut their hair pretty short. It's just a function of,
and it's going to get in your face while you're trying to do work.
Yes, it is. And it
doesn't help you.
If you see like the Zero G is a company that does zero gravity flights. The plane does parabolas at the top of the parabola. Yeah. Vomit comet. That's why I can't go on it. I will just throw up everywhere. But one of the things that they always tell you is to let your hair out because it looks really cool in all the pictures to have your hair kind of floating around in zero gravity. But in reality, it's like gonna get dirty and gross. So that was a funny joke that they made that I didn't even think of really until Gates was like, and here are the practical ladies who are actually doing science and actually changing the world, and they have the short hair.
Let's talk about Macrocosm, Voyager, Season 3, Episode 12. And my rewatch of this, one of the things I loved the most is I had forgotten that it started with the emotive tac people, which I always remember that scene. Like, I will never forget that, but I always forget that it's in this episode. But I
yes.
love the whole thing there. And it has my favorite little bit of Star Trek continuity when someone says to Neil, "You're getting fluid in your lungs," and he goes, "Lung."
Oh, yes, because he only has one.
Tell me why this episode is special to you. I think everybody knows which one this is, so I don't even need to recap it. So you go ahead, Amy, and take it from there.
Janeway basically being John McClane running around the Voyager, like shooting macroviruses. First of all, it evokes Starship Mine, which is the episode where Patrick Stewart is running around the ship. And hilariously, Tuvok is one of the bad guys. Tim Russ plays one of the bad guys in Starship Mine. So I thought that was a nice little tidbit because Tim Russ has got around. But he's not really in this episode. Nobody's in this episode except for Janeway and Neelix and a little bit of the Doctor.
Mm-hmm.
When I think about this episode, the thing that first comes to mind is when she goes into engineering, she takes off her top of her uniform, she gasses up her, she attaches the grenade to her belt, she takes a knife, she puts the knife on her belt, she takes the phaser rifle and she's like puts everything in her backpack and she's like ready to kick butt. And I was like, that's just, I remember, first of all, I remember watching that episode with my brother. So I must have been like, I'm trying to think how old I was when that aired. I was probably like 14, maybe 15.
It always reminded me.
What season is it?
This is season 3.
3. Okay, I knew it was before 709 got there.
Yeah, this that little scene always reminds me of like Ripley and Aliens, like in the elevator.
I love it. Yeah. So yeah, I was like 14, 15, and my brother was like 12, and we were watching it, and we had not seen a preview for it. So maybe your younger viewers don't remember, but when you watched a Star Trek episode every week, you usually did not know what was coming. Unlike now, when they drop like description and like photos, and like you get to kind of see some of the scenes and kind of some of the beats of what the episode is going to be, so what you know what to expect. We did not know what to expect, and we were like scared. We were like hiding under the blanket, like watching, like, oh no, these macroviruses are eating the crew, like Harry Kim and everybody else is like got flies coming out their neck. It was just gross, and they just made a very creepy kind of horror atmosphere out of the ship. I liked that. I thought that's like watching it as an adult. Really, the music cues are a little different. The slime on the wall, like it's very evocative of a lot of the a lot of the kind of horror genre that kind of came out of the 90s, which I thought was great. A little bit of a Ghostbusters vibe almost.
Yeah, a little bit.
She's busting ghosts. She's busting macroviruses. Well, one of the big reasons I picked this episode is because during the pandemic, I feel like Voyager became a real analogy for people. Stranded alone in the Delta Quadrant was kind of akin to all of us being stranded in quarantine, fighting a virus, self-explanatory. Just the Voyager being alone. If people rewatched a lot of Voyager during the pandemic, at one point it was the most watched Star Trek series on Netflix. And I think, people were really getting into it, and they were really upping their Star Trek watching when we were all trapped inside.
Star Trek Voyager, episode Macrocosm, the official episode of COVID-19.
Totally true. And then I did a really great little graphic for Kate, and it was like it was Janeway holding the phaser rifle, like about to shoot the macrovirus, and I put a little mask on her, and like it was like a reminder for people to wear their mask. And Volente did a short run of masks. They sent one to me and I gave it to Kate. So I have a picture of Kate wearing her Janeway mask during the pandemic. And, we also did I think Kate really wanted to connect with people over the pandemic. And we did this series called Cocktails with Kate.
Mm-hmm.
We did 10 Thursday evenings where we picked 7 or 8 people or 7, and it was a good number of people every week that got to talk to Kate for free. She said, I don't want it to cost anything. I just want people to, have these. She said, I want to talk to epidemiologists. I want to talk to scientists. I want to talk to, people working with, social justice and, how we're kind of helping people during this time period. And we did one where all we talked to was kids who were only who are not yet in college. So everybody was 17, 18. And I've kind of kept up with them since then. And they're all kind of now at the end of their college careers. And that was a great group of mostly ladies. There was one boy, but it was almost all girls. And they're very socially conscious. Just talking to them, you're the kids are all right. They were very anti-gun violence. I think the shooting in Florida had happened recently. And they talked a little bit about that. They talked about not having able to go to their prom, having to go to Zoom prom. Can you imagine? I cannot. I mean, that was such a formative, high school experience, was all of those activities we got to do during senior week and really bonding with your, marking the end of something and the beginning of your kind of adult life was very formative. So I think Macrocosm really echoed that. And I remember her talking about Macrocosm with the kids, and with that, a lot of people brought it up. So it's kind of impactful for me to kind of remember those chats that I got to witness. And because I ran the Zoom, I said everybody signed in and I got to hear everybody talk to Kate and made some fabulous friends through that. The gentleman who is the head of communications at the Jane Goodall Institute, Sean Sweeney, was on one of our Cocktails with Kate, and now I'm working with him, so that's awesome. Also, we had a really awesome lady named Victoria who lives in New Zealand. She and her husband have a lot of chickens and a lot of wildlife, and they're always redoing their house, and she's just got the funniest turns of phrase. And it's nice to hear the Prime Minister of New Zealand at that period, Jacinda Ardern, was really one of the few world leaders that was taking COVID very seriously, and I really think she protected New Zealand in a way that no other country got to see. And of course, them being an island and being isolated in the Pacific was greatly helpful. But she, being a cool, badass lady world leader, I think they talked about her on the cocktail hour that Victoria was part of, and talking about what how she actually stepped down. She was I'm done with in the years since I've obviously watched her career, and she stepped aside because she was I'm done with this sexist bullshit. This is the most she would get together with other world leaders. And they I think it was the young woman who is the Prime Minister of Finland. They were what are you two talking about? And they're world commerce. And everyone was they wanted to be talking about shoes and babies. And I'm why are we still doing this? It's 2023 or whatever it was when she stepped down. So it's just very interesting to see that some people have totally caught up with the fact that women are equals in society, and some people have not. But it's always kind of through that lens, right? You got to see it through that professional lens of Kate getting hate mail and getting these voicemails that people left for Paramount when a woman became captain. It's really? Wow. I guess if they're that upset about Michael Burnham being a Black woman in the captain's chair, they are going to be upset about, they will have had that previous record of going on record saying Janeway should not be captain. Ridiculous.
So you've talked a little bit about 7 of 9. So let's address that issue head on. Let's talk about Scorpion. This is Voyager season 3, episode 26, and season 4, episode 1. And this, of course, is really a pair of episodes that's really tied into the whole sunsetting the Kess character and really bringing the 7 of 9 character on board. And of course, we have the introduction of species 8675309. So tell me, what about the Scorpion episodes is important to you?
I think this is a great two-parter. It really showcases Janeway being the decision maker on Voyager, and how the crew. One of the things that I've talked about with Kate and just fandom in general when I do panels on women is that when Janeway gives an order, the men on the crew don't question her. They do what she says. Like that's an important part of establishing authority for the character, and to make sure that everyone around her recognizes her authority. And yes, she's going to have conflict with, the Maquis crew. But in this two-parter, Chakotay is very adamantly goes against what Janeway wants to do. And you get to see, like, they have that whole conversation about, he's like, it's in their nature. They have the parable of the scorpion and the fox, and it's going to sting you, and I can't help it, it's in my nature, like that kind of thing. I think the outcome of the episode being that Seven does betray them at the end of part 2, and Janeway taps her comm badge and tells Chakotay to execute the scorpion protocol that they have come up with. It's like it's a compromise, but it also shows that Janeway is the authority here. Like, we are going, and when she gets injured working with the Borg, and they have to beam her back to the ship, and she's on the sickbay table, and she tells Chakotay that you have to work with the Borg, you can't just do your own thing, and then he completely disregards that. and he like decides, I'm not doing this, we're not doing it. And then Janeway wakes up, thank God, and comes in, and she says, I'm not going to be caught tinkering with the deflector dish while the Borg are at our doorstep. Someone has to make the call, and I'm making it. This is what's happening. And that was just very powerful to be like, listen, jerk, who has come in and messed up my whole command plan. But she doesn't. She says she puts him in the brig and relieves him of duty, but clearly that's not what happened, right? Like, he goes and he's connected to the collective, and he gets in Seven of Mind's brain and all that. But to say that she did that, and that you think that she's relieved him of duty for being, disrespectful and going against her orders, like, I thought that was like totally believable. Like, she would definitely do that if she thought that he was really undermining her. And just being able to see kind of the, what we've learned over 3 seasons about Janeway as a character, and then, coming in and dealing with the Borg, and, being the first Star Trek show to really say, like, instead of fighting the Borg all the time, we're going to make an alliance with the Borg. Mm-hmm. Like, we have to. There's no other choice. Like, both of us are not going to survive unless we do it. And they come up with the nanotechnology in order to just like blow the 8472 ships out the water. And and you see like Seven of Nine coming in and being like answering every like question with, we are Borg. Like, it's just I love seeing her when she first comes on screen. And then I always think to myself, God, Jerry must have been so uncomfortable in that outfit. All that Borg stuff.
One of the things I try to do, I often fail at this, but one of the things I try to do, there's 2 things I try to do, and I've talked about this on the show before, is I try to analyze Star Trek always in what we call the 4 corners of the screen. Meaning that, like, we talked about the episode with Major Kira being pregnant. I know that there's production reasons for that, right? I try to ignore that and say, like, I'm just going to pay attention to what I see on the screen, right? That's what I'm going to focus on. So when I look at this episode, I try to put myself back into the mindset of, like, if I was seeing this for the first time, and like forgetting everything I know about what comes after, because we don't know about 7 of 9 when the season 3 episode is playing, right? That's not till later. And just seeing 15 Borg cubes totally bypass the Voyager and, like, scanning them and then going on their way. I just, in my head, I would have been like, what is actually happening right now in this episode, right? I mean, we have never seen the Borg like that. Like, that is almost more terrifying than the Borg attacking, is them being like...
Watching it, yes. Watching it live, watching it as a teenager, I definitely got that sense of, like, it was very like a sweeping event. Do you remember when they used to do like events? Yeah. Remember when they aired like Dark Frontier? It was like a big event. They did these little interstitials with Kate and Jerry on the bridge and talking a little bit about the show. So yeah, it was... Seeing the Borg running scared, that was very, I thought that was very cool that they got to do that.
So I have another episode to ask you about, and I'm going to tie this into a little bit of social media. So there's 2 real parts of this that I want to talk to you about. And it's Star Trek TNG Data's Day. That's season 4, episode 11, which I think could be described as a filler episode. And there's been a lot of discussion and discourse online about filler episodes lately. And I try not to make the show too much of the moment, but it certainly is an episode that's not necessarily about the grander arc of Star Trek in a lot of ways, but certainly about a lot of personal interplay between the characters. So I'd love to know, first of all, why is this episode special to you? And what is your opinion of this whole filler filler discourse?
Data's Day is the episode of Star Trek that I show to people that have never seen Star Trek before, because it is a great entry into the show. It tells you all about what the characters are like. It gives you like a model of what Star Trek really excels at. And I think it's funny that this whole discussion on filler episodes, like those are some of the best episodes. Those are some of the best writing. The writers have to be creative because, you know, they've run out of budget to do the big stuff. So they're going to write what is essentially a bottle episode, only using the sets that they have. You know, in this case, that's all of the action takes place on the Enterprise. And just we get to know Data and how he interacts with the crew. Like it is one of my very favorite episodes of all of Star Trek because, and also I recently had I had surgery recently and I was very stressed out before surgery. I had sinus surgery.
I hope you're okay.
I'm
okay,
fine.
Good.
I am fine. It was on, you know, I'm a veteran of many sinus infections, so hopefully this will eliminate that going forward. And I was very nervous beforehand, and my husband said, you know, you got surgery tomorrow. Like, what do you want to watch? And I was like, Data's Day. Because it's just it's a comforting episode. I love that he has that whole scene with Dr. Crusher where she teaches him how to dance, you know, and it's funny because he says to her in sickbay, can you teach me how to dance? And she like pulls him aside. She's like, shh, why are you telling people that? I don't want to be the dancing doctor anymore. And I'm like, but I love that about her. And it's, you know, they get to, of course, work in Gates's long career in theater. And dance and all of the things that she got to do before she was, and they're all, I mean, Star Trek is a lot of stage actors. They come from doing Broadway and West End and you know, small regional theater and all of the cool creative stuff that I think really makes them love acting and just creating these characters and being able to create those backgrounds for Dr. Crusher and for Data and for the O'Briens, because, you know, he's gonna walk her down the aisle and, you know, he's talking to each one of the crew members in turn, and he says it's, you know, and we, of course, it actually comes back in Picard when they talk about Dr. Maddox, right?
Yep, absolutely.
That's the one that has been studying Data and studying the way he interacts with human culture and emotions and relationships. And I think, you know, it's great that they picked up on some of those threads with the character. And the discourse about filler episodes, though, like I think it was Alex Kurtzman, who said something like having 10 episode seasons cuts down on filler.
Yeah, exactly.
Was that
it was something like that. Yeah.
The thing that that's what kicked
and there was
it
a
off.
lot of discussion that I saw that came after that. So
yes, I don't agree at all. Sorry, Alex. I think that you know, and I've read interviews where they have said, you know, where the director from the top, ostensibly Kurtzman and whoever else is making those decisions at Paramount, have come down and said, make this less Star Trek. I'm sorry, I'm gonna drop an F-bomb now.
go ahead.
Why? Why do you want to make Star Trek less Star Trek? Because the fans are here for that stuff. We are here for the character moments. We are here for the fun stuff. I mean, everyone loves a good space battle. You can get a good space battle in any sci-fi property. Mm-hmm. We're here for a different kind of sci-fi. We're here for, you know, the hopeful vision of the future, not just like the pew 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 lasers, laser fight, you know. And I love that stuff. Some of my favorite scenes in Battlestar Galactica are the Vipers and the Raptors going out and, like, you know, kicking some Cylon butt. I love that. Who doesn't?
All right, we're going to divert for just a second. I'm sorry.
Okay.
One of my all-time favorite whole things in Battlestar Galactica is the Battle of Ragnar Anchorage, right there in the miniseries, because it shows the whole idea that there is an actual strategy. It's not like these two ships in Star Trek, and I'm talking even modern Star Trek, they just sort of have the two ships sort of like slowly moving and facing each other and just sort of blasting each other, and it's like that's not what would happen. Like there's no strat. Like the guys are like reversal, you know, pattern Sierra, whatever, and like the ship like sort of moves a little bit, you know, and it's just like that's not what it would be. And I just really love that
I
there was a
also,
strategy. I'm sorry,
yeah.
go ahead. If you want to say anything about that.
No, I also love that there's military strategy behind it, and you get to see that in Battlestar, and the military structure is a bit stronger in Battlestar Galactica than it is in Star Trek. But Starfleet is modeled on the Navy. I being friends with Thomas Maroney from Star Trek Online has really given me a depth of knowledge about the ships and the naval tactics, and he's read books on naval tactics, and he loves Master and Commander, and kind of the things that and one of my favorite scenes in Generations is them being on that wooden ship, talking about being out at sea, talking about I love the quote from Riker where he's like, bad food, no women, brutal discipline. Like, it's just a funny quote from Riker because that's obviously what he would say. But just this is the tradition that they come from. They come from a British, which is very specific. Like, if you're thinking about Starfleet as like a network of different races, different modern people, but no, this is what they're hearkening back to because it's a function of our society, which comes from British imperialism and all of that stuff. And just seeing I'm laughing to myself because I'm thinking of like Worf falling into the water, like retract the plank, like those are the moments in Star Trek. You could argue that was maybe filler. It's some of my favorite stuff. Like, it's what makes it Star Trek. And to anyone who is whining about filler episodes, go home. Like, what are you here for? Like if all you're here for are space battles and you're not here, like, what do we love? What made us cry when Picard season 3 came out? It was those 7 people sitting around a conference table. Like, we all cried because they were sitting around a conference table. And it's so funny to me that those are the things that really make us just, our hearts swell and are like, feel that deep love. I have such deep love for the Next Generation and for all of the things that Terry Matalas captured in Picard season 3, because some people whine, the story wasn't as consistent, they brought back the Borg again, but it was what we needed. That was the kind of interaction. Even like on Strange New Worlds, one of my honestly, it might be the best episode of modern Star Trek, Those Old Scientists. Like, that was arguably a filler episode. They went through a portal. They spent most of it on the Enterprise. It wasn't like this big sweeping space battle. Like, it was just human moments between characters that we know and love. And also it was characters that were just deeply obsessed with like the idea of Pike and Uhura and Spock and Number One, and just the whole interaction where they say she's on the poster, right? Where the ad aspera.
Yep.
The ad astra, ad aspera. Yeah, that the struggle to the stars and all that. Like, that was a courtroom episode. We love a courtroom episode, you guys. Like, Data in the episode where Data's on trial. Like, that's arguably a filler episode. They spent most of it in a room talking about human rights.
One of my favorite examples,
non-human rights.
One of my favorite examples of all this myself is The Menagerie, which is an episode of Star Trek where they watch Star Trek. And it was literally designed to be an episode because they were running out of episodes. And so they're like, I can do a 2-parter by re-showing this earlier episode, in Star Trek. I mean, it's just, it's wild. I love that stuff. So I didn't understand that discourse at all.
I very much disagree with the way Paramount has been treating Star Trek lately. Call me y'all. I'll tell you what you're doing wrong. Like, that's really, and like I said, there's a whole bunch of haterade and a whole subset of people on social media who are going to bitch and whine no matter what they get, because it's not. But even when they get Picard season 3, even when they get the nostalgia factor, they still whine about it. So you know what? Make cool shows. Don't listen to that stuff.
Let's talk about one more Voyager episode. Let's talk about Scientific Method, Season 4, Episode 7. Those skulls kissing is something I will never forget. Utterly gross. But the massage chair with Janeway and the EMH is hilarious. And of course, my favorite bit is we have the scientist lady at the end saying, I have to do all these experiments because the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one. And Janeway goes, no freaking way. So I just want to mark a flag on that because that might come up later. So tell me about this particular episode for you, Amy. Why is it important?
I just really like this episode. It is a very good example of interacting with a species that they don't agree with. They don't agree with their methods. They don't agree with the way that they kind of come in and are surreptitious about the way they're experimenting on people. It's a commentary on, what we do as as scientists, when we test something on other people. There's a whole, I'm not a scientist, but I work with a lot of women in STEM. I guess you could say I'm in the T part of STEM, the technology end of it, because I do talk a lot about technology and like having an analog childhood and a digital adulthood. As a elder millennial, we kind of straddle that. And the way that I just like how they figure out what's going on. It's like a mystery. I like watching them figure out a mystery. And one of the great things about space, and this is how, Star Trek frames everything, which is a group of smart people working together to solve big problems. And that's always super interesting to me, no matter what. And just seeing everybody kind of come together and be like, something weird is happening. This is like this is the premise of any Star Trek episode. Something weird is happening. It's not good. We need to figure out what's happening and stop it. And then the moral dilemma, that kind of discussion that kind of goes into that. I mean, they're keeping Janeway up for days at a time. Like, I, as a sufferer of insomnia, let me tell you that is one of the most unpleasant things, is when you go several days without sleep because your body and your brain are just like yip, 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 all night long. Or you've taken, like, I've taken cold medicine before, not realizing that it has like a stimulant property in one of the ingredients. And I'm like so exhausted and sick, but you need to like sleep to heal. So I feel like I can identify with Janeway on that insomnia aspect.
Let me ask you about one particular part of this, and you can respond to this in this particular episode or in any of the other episodes because it shows up a lot, and that's the Da Vinci simulation. Did you like the Da Vinci stuff? Did you not like it? Sort of neutral.
I love the Da Vinci stuff. I think first of all, it's John Rhys Davies. I mean, how can you dislike John Rhys Davies? And I think that Janeway taking inspiration from like a great thinker, that's very on track for her character, like a great thinker of of human history, basically. And the way that Da Vinci was so ahead of his time and was dissecting bodies and was, trying to figure out flying machines and, all of the different things. And I know that it's kind of like, some people see it as like hokey or contrived or all of those stuff. I don't. I enjoy it. It's really hard for me to find super negative things to say about any of Star Trek, really. And I said Enterprise is the one that comes closest to me being like, these characters just don't resonate. Like, I'm not like tearing anybody down or being like, F you to like all of the people who are making it. Just, sometimes the writing is there and sometimes it doesn't hit for people. And that one didn't hit for me, but it's hard for me to say bad stuff about any of it because it's all Star Trek, right? It's like, it's automatically going to be better than a lot of the other stuff that's out there. And I'm a huge TV watcher and a huge consumer of modern media. And I don't see anything wrong with like saying, like pointing back in our history and being like, look at Leonardo da Vinci, look at all the things that, he was also probably gay. Like they have talked about, historians have talked about, kind of the relationships that he'd had with like apprentices and things like that. And, it's kind of interesting to see where LGBT plus discourse has taken us in terms of like, people are so worked up now about trans folks. And I'm like, why are we focusing on this stuff? We have like real problems to solve. We're never going to get to Star Trek if we keep whining about bathrooms. Like we have so many bigger problems to solve, like when it comes to climate change and, looking for cures for diseases. And Kate is an Alzheimer's advocate, and I've learned a lot about the research for Alzheimer's just working with her. And they're using space to grow drugs for diseases like Alzheimer's and muscular dystrophy and cancer. And when protein matrices grow in zero gravity, they grow more complex and quicker because they're not being pulled down by gravity. So the whole theory behind it is that they could grow a drug in space, grow a cancer drug or grow an Alzheimer's drug in space, bring it back to Earth and inject it into people and see how it fights the disease in a different way. So the experimentation in scientific method is not ethical because you don't have anyone's consent and you don't have, it's kind of a lesson in consent almost. Like, if Janeway had come across a ship of people who were like, hey, we're scientists and we're doing experiments, these are the things that we're testing. Like, would you consent to us doing XYZ? Like, she might have said like yes to some of it, right? Like, it's like a very interesting, it's just an interesting, like they just barge in and do it without any kind of like ethical, like,
Right.
consent. So, and I see that they're trying to further science in their society, and Jamie's like, this is not how we do things, yo.
I had a weird convergence of events around my rewatching of this particular episode in preparation for this, because I had listened to, quite accidentally, another podcast that has nothing to do with sci-fi or Star Trek, but it was a interview show where they were interviewing this guy about AI, and they were talking about putting people into AI, like making simulacrums of people. And one of the thoughts that had occurred to me about this as I was listening to this very in-depth, really interesting interview was, if we were to take you, for instance, Amy, and we were to make an AI of you, what test could we make for the AI to say how accurate a representation of Amy is this? And I'm not talking about asking knowledge questions like where did Amy hide her secret toys when she was a child? Not questions like that. But how accurate, what scale could we come up with to say how accurate an AI of Amy is this, that responds in the way that we would think that she would? Because there's a difference, and this is a very profound human thought, I think. There's a profound difference between how people expect you to act and how you actually act, because even in people that you know well, there's always serendipity and surprises. And so I was just thinking about, how would you measure this? So here we have this recreation of Da Vinci, right? Mm. And we know what we know of Da Vinci, but how accurate could it even be? And how would we even measure that? I don't know if you want to respond to any of that. Feel free. It's just something I was thinking about as I was watching it.
Yeah. The questions around AI and, can they do what humans do? I mean, obviously they can't. The self-driving cars are crashing. The AI art has 10 fingers on one hand. Like, it's like very, and it's taking away jobs from creative people. And that's obviously, totally against, I mean, I work with creative people all the time. You can't replicate what comes out of interaction for creatives with an AI machine. Like, we can use AI to do some of the more repetitive stuff that we can outsource. It's just like any automation, right? You can do like for example, I hate going to the self-checkout in the grocery store. Mm-hmm. I hate that. It's like the machine breaks half the time. It doesn't know what you're doing. It doesn't have the intuition to say like, the item scanned twice and you didn't mean to scan it twice, or like whatever happens, this is like an incorrect type of thing. I want to go to a person. First of all, that's a job for somebody, they're getting paid to do. But I think the AI discussion is like, people are just going crazy over it. Like, it's like anything else that's kind of like the whole Bitcoin thing, and everybody's all, I'm like, Bitcoin is just made up. Like, I get that all money is made up, that we've assigned it this value as a society, but you're trying to kind of ascribe value to a virtual like thing that is part of it's theoretical, really. And to be able to say like, what would an AI of me respond? Like, how would I accurately respond to something that would replicate how I would? I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, I'm saying what would be the measurement scale? Like, how could you say it's 80% accurate, right? Or 50%? How would you even do that, right? It's an interesting thing to think about.
I mean, yeah. You'd have to like feed it like, this is the stuff that I've written, these are the things that I've read, this is the education that I've had, this is but you can't feed it like interactions that I've had with people that have made me who I mm-hmm. am. Like, you can't be like, well, this is a cumulative, 20 years with my husband of interactions with him, you can't feed it that, right? You can't do that. So I think, I don't know, I think any AI of ourselves would be at the most inaccurate.
Yeah.
And at the worst, like wildly incorrect. Like, they're just, because you're shaped emotionally, like it's all emotions. Like, Data has it right when he's like, I want to experience emotions because it makes me more human. Because the AI can't experience those emotions because my emotions have shaped the way and have changed the way that I respond to people. The things that I've experienced with, like I was talking about with my mother, the way that I've, the therapy that I've gone through has changed how I interact with people from a business standpoint. It's changed the way that I've kind of approached a lot of the drama that comes with being in a fandom. I've talked a little bit on panels about toxic fandom and the things that we encounter as women online, the threats. I've been doxxed for saying stuff. I got so many dudes screaming at me when I tweeted that Patrick Stewart was telling all the nerd men to go to therapy. Recently I tweeted that I tweeted about Tilly. I tweeted about Mary Wiseman's character on Discovery, and I said, if you don't like Tilly and you're criticizing Tilly, then I don't want to hear from your garbage and trash opinions. Like, I just don't, because Tilly is not there to be the 7 of 9 of the crew, right? She's not there for your sexual fantasies. She's not there to be, nor should every female character be there and be ranked on a scale of whether or not you want to sleep with them. Like, that's not the scale of which women characters should be measured against. Female characters should be just as diverse as male characters and non-binary characters. And there's so many different ways of being a woman that when I see someone ripping on her for being enthusiastic, primarily the enthusiasm and the fact that she got to drop the first F-bomb on Star Trek and say science is so cool. I mean, if you're going to use an F-bomb on Star Trek, then yes, you're going to be like excited about science and about some of the cool stuff that they're doing on the, whatever starship you're on. I mean, what is it? Pike doesn't Pike say something like we're skipping across the universe on a pathway made of mushrooms?
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. It's a great quote where I'm like, he can say it, and everybody like hails Pike as like the second coming of like modern masculinity and like, all of the cool stuff that makes Pike great and makes them, I mean, look at the 3 leads on Strange New Worlds. Does Anson Mount, Ethan Peck, and Rebecca Romaine get anywhere near as much garbage hate as Sonequa Martin Green has endured? As Mary Wiseman has endured? No. And it's because they're white heteronormative characters. And it makes me so infuriated when I see that, we've both come so far as a society, but we've taken so many steps back in recent years. And the idea that everybody gets to have a say on the internet and gets to have an opinion, even if that opinion is like, here's my dick pic, I'm going to put in your DMs because I think that and the whole culture around like, Louis C.K. and we talked about, the men exposing themselves to women and how that's like a power move and it's a gross power move and the Me Too movement and all these things that I talk about, which I could go on at length forever, but this is already getting very long, is indicative of that we still have not taken those steps forward as a culture. And, the fact that Pike can say, let's go skip across the universe on a highway made of restrooms, and Tilly can't say science is so cool. I'm sorry. What's wrong with you people? And
it was just really strange to me that as I was watching this episode, we had this AI thing that happened at the same time. And I mean, the part of it, I just want to bring it back to this, which is, you mentioned you've been married a long time. I've been married a long time too. My wife still surprises me with things where I think, here's exactly what she's going to respond to this and what she's going to say, and she does something else. And I think, how could we even have an episode? How could you in Star Trek, given all the technology and all the wonderful things they have, right? I mean, how could we possibly have a recreation of a historical character like that would be even remotely like what they actually were? I mean, it's so much of it has to be made up. I don't know. It was just interesting to me. That might be my own personal thing.
It's true.
Amy, you have responded to my message and I invited you on the show and you decided to come on here and talk with me about Star Trek for quite a period of time. You tweet and are very public and active on social media, talking about Star Trek and things related to science and all of that. Obviously, Star Trek has been a big influence on your life. My question is, what does Star Trek mean to you?
Star Trek means diversity and equality and hope for a better future. I think that's the super short answer. If I were to just elaborate very slightly, it would be a universe where smart people are working together to solve the big problems that humanity faces, and the way we all have a unique part to play in making those problems, turning those problems into solutions.
Well, Amy, I've enjoyed our conversation, and I hope you have as well.
I have. Thank you.
But the M5 is signaling me that it's now time for the Kobayashi Maru.
Uh-oh.
The Kobayashi Maru is a challenging and difficult test, cunningly prepared by the M5. Should you not only survive the test, but pass it as well, the M5 will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our little program. Are you ready to face the M5, Amy?
I am ready. Bring it on.
M5, load the Kobayashi Maru simulation and prepare to record our guest responses.
Kobayashi Maru available and ready.
Which piece of the progenitor's puzzle was the hardest to get? Piece 1, Piece 2, or Piece 3?
Piece 2.
What are we drinking? A Sumerian sunset, Klingon blood wine, or Aldebaran whiskey?
Sumerian sunset.
Worst being to be stuck with in the turbolift? Reginald Barclay, Brad Boimler, Human Q, or Quark?
Human Q.
What are we reading, Amy? The Epic of Gilgamesh, The Never-Ending Sacrifice, The Fall of Kang, or Photons Be Free?
Photons Be Free.
Pick your bridge spot under Captain Burnham on the Discovery in the 31st century. Spore drive operations, comms, helm, or weapons?
Comms.
Simulation complete. M5, please compute the results and tell us if our guest has passed the Kobayashi Maru.
Analyzing performance.
Amy, I am pleased to tell you the M5 has calculated that you have passed the Kobayashi Maru simulation. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And now, the M5, who has analyzed your answers, will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our podcast. M5, what title shall we award our guest?
Amy is awarded the title of Admissions Counselor at Starfleet Academy.
So there you go.
That is quite interesting. I don't object. I think that's kind of cool.
Amy, please tell people how they can get in touch with you, where they can follow you.
You can find me on pretty much all social media platforms as Amy Imhoff 1701. My Facebook is private, sorry y'all. But I'm on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, all the new ones that have popped up. I just claim Amy Imhoff 1701 everywhere.
Amy, thank you so much for being part of Trek Profiles.
Thank you so much for having me, John. I so appreciate it. This has been a lovely discussion.
Here ends this installment of Trek Profiles. And before we offer a quote to close this episode, I'd like to remind you that you may send us your happy mental emanations, your angry Trek ponderings, or audio of yourself singing along to the musical episode to feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter at Trek Profiles. Anything you send us may be used in the show or may be deposited for all time in the eternal gallery and archive. This time, I'll leave you with a quote from the episode Thine Own Self, where Counselor Troy says, quote, "My first duty is to the ship, close quote. Thanks for listening and live long and prosper.
This handcrafted podcast is brought to you by Stars and Sky Media Lab. It's cosmic.
I was very pleased that you gave me a lot of episodes that I haven't talked about in a while, so that was always a lot of fun.
Oh, yay.
And a few that have never been mentioned on the show, which is awesome.
Oh, really? Which ones?
Let's see. Well, yesterday's Enterprise comes up a lot. Thine Own Self, nope. Darkness and the Light, nope.
That was okay. Great. Yeah. The Yesterday's Enterprise was really more like that's what started my Star Trek. Like I don't think we're going to talk about it a ton, but I just wanted to be like that was the first one I saw and why it was significant.
Right, groovy. Well, first of all, thank you for taking the opportunity to record with me.
I think this is going to be really cool. I listened to a couple of your podcasts, and you seem to get really interesting answers out of your guests.
I'm interested in talking to people. So those two things help me do this podcast.
So am I. No, and I always listen when, especially when it's just one, no offense, one man doing the podcast. I always listen because I'm like, is he going to try to be like, you're wrong, you're this, you're that?
What?
And you did not do
I don't
that.
know who does that. That's weird. No, I don't do that.
I have been on 2 podcasts where that has happened.
You know, I mean, obviously there's some things like a factual mistake. Like, no, I don't think it was that episode. I think it was the other episode where that thing happened.
No, it'll be like, oh, like totally don't agree with you, or like, I mean, I worked for Kate for 6 years, and I've had people who be like, this is why Janeway sucks, and I'll be like, I'm leaving.
Well, that's your opinion, right? It's like, you know, there's no, I don't know.
I'm not gonna go on a podcast where you're dissing the women of Star
No.
Trek. Like, that's not.
No, we don't do that here.
No.
That's my issue. When we begin the podcast, one of the first question is always, "Are you a Star Trek fan?" And you have to say yes,
I don't know.
and that's it, right? And I don't do any further gatekeeping than that. If you say yes, then you're a Star Trek fan, and I'm not going to put some qualifications, other qualifications around it. Like, you have to like the episodes I like, and you have to like them for the correct reasons that I like, and you have to like them in the correct way and at the correct intensity, and we have to agree on. I'm just not that way.
Well, it's like, it was really funny. I was in line to get Katie Sackhoff's autograph ages ago. This was right when Battlestar ended.
Okay.
At New York Comic Con, and I got there early. I was only like the 4th person in line or something like that. And then I had seen that she had tweeted about going to a Dixie Chicks concert. So I was like, I love the Dixie Chicks. So I was like, talked to her about it when she got there for a few minutes, and then she went back to kind of get ready in her little booth area.
Yeah.
And I had my Battlestar Last Supper picture, which you can't see because it's on the
I know the
opposite wall.
picture.
I'm not gonna.
I know the picture you're talking about.
So it is signed by as many people as I can get to sign it who are on the show. I have what's his face who passed away, Richard Hatch. I have Michael Hogan, who has had a stroke.
Yeah, I know. I'm in his GoFundMe. I supported that.
So am I.
Yeah.
So am I. I only need Bear McCreary. I got what's her face to sign it. Boomer, when I met her.
Grace Park.
Shortly. That's my most recent. Was Grace Park. So all I need are Jamie Bamber, Michael Trucco, and both of them are going to be at the Battlestar thing they just announced in creation.
Isn't that awesome?
It's the same weekend as SpaceCon San Antonio, which I messaged about doing astronaut panels, and I was like,
oh man,
okay.
that's a bummer. So,
well,
what you got?
I might try to go anyway. I'm done eating.
You might need to get a trusted advisor to go for you and get those autographs.
No way. I would never trust anybody with that poster.
I got you.
That and I have a piece of the Galactica that's hanging on my wall. Also, they had an auction after the show, and it's a panel from Adama's office. It's like a wooden panel that's painted gray with texturing, and I only wanted 3 people to sign it. I wanted Adama, Roslyn, and Michael Hogan, so a tie. So they all have signed it. Although Mary wrote Laura Roslyn and did not write Mary McDonald. So when I see her now, I'm like, Mary, you have to write Mary McDonald. We were talking because I've done stuff with her and with Kate and everything. So we got distracted by talking.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
It was just funny.
I really enjoyed Battlestar, mostly because I was in the Navy for a long time. And there was just a lot of stuff in the show that was very indicative that they had people who had actually worked on ships who knew things about how the military operated. So I really liked that.
Okay. Because I wanted to tell people who was coming to ISDC and what it was as a conference.
Generally speaking, my shows marinate for at least 3 to 4 months.
Oh, that's a long time.
So yeah, it's normally a while. The episode I just released, I think, was recorded in November or December.
Okay, that's not your fault. You're one guy. You have a job. You have a life.
It's my show is not about matters of the moment. The reason I ask for that is if you go to trekprofiles.com, you'll get any of my show notes, posts. There's always a nature photo there. That's always a photo from wherever the person is from. So
there's some really good ones from coastal Connecticut. Yeah, pick one of us in the fall. The fall's our best season.
Yeah, I'll find something. So sometimes I do a spacescape, sometimes I do nature, trees, whatever. It depends,
yeah. Well, space might be better since I'm now working with aerospace.
All right, I'll see what I can find. Boom diggity, we're done. Was that okay for you? Did you have a good time?
That was great. Yes, I did. Thank you.
All right, fantastic. So please send me some photos of your collection. And send me your local recording. I accept all the methods: Google Drive, Box.net, WeTransfer.com. I do all the things. And
I
we'll be good
also
to go.
do all the things as a function of being a freelancer.
Yeah, so send whatever works for you works for me. So just send me that stuff and we're good to go.
Great.
So thank you so much.
This was awesome. Thank you for a great recording. And you said you're going to probably cut it down a little and have some extra stuff that'll be like show notes and
yeah. So like some of the
content.
chit chat, if it's like if it's Star Trek related, it generally stays in. If it is funny but not Star Trek related, I put it in the bonus content at the end. So I leave that stuff in, but it goes at the back. So I try to keep it like Star Trek, non-Star Trek, so there you go. So like in the latest episode I just released the other day, my guest and I had a huge discussion about the Apple TV show Severance, which we were both deeply in love with. So that all went in the bonus material. Yeah, if you haven't watched that one, that's my recommendation for you. You should definitely check it out.
Yeah, that I hear that's a good one. My husband watched whatchamacallit, that one everything with the kids and Kieran and Culkin and
Succession.
Succession. I'm like, it's an S word, also a single word.